The wind whistled a lonely tune through the half-broken shutters of the great hall in Winterfell, carrying with it the biting chill of the northern night. The courtyard below stood empty, but for a single guard making his rounds, torchlight casting dancing shadows along the worn stone. Night had a way of cloaking Winterfell in a deep hush, as though the ancient keep was holding its breath, waiting for some momentous event to unfold. Within, a solitary candle burned in the chamber where Jon Snow had locked himself away, the glow casting flickering shapes that climbed the rough-hewn walls. He could hear the soft shifting of ghosts outside his door, the direwolf unsettled by Jon's own restless thoughts. Memories of his sworn brothers at the wall and the oath he had once considered his life's purpose played ceaselessly in his mind. There had been a time when he believed his duty was simple: defend the realms of men against the threats from beyond the wall, and his life would be well spent. But war, honor, and bloodlines had a way of complicating everything. It had been Sansa who first spoke the words aloud, "You are the king in the north." Those words had resounded through the hall, echoed by the lords and ladies who believed in his cause, a cause that meant defending all Westeros. Yet that rallying cry soon grew bolder, traveling beyond the north. Whispers carried through couriers and ravens, weaving tales of a certain bastard boy who might not be a bastard after all. Some said a secret Targaryen, others said a cunning ploy by the Starks. Rumors took root in the hearts of soldiers and small folk alike, for they had long heard the stories of King's Landing's corruption. They spoke of the feckless boy king on the Iron Throne, Tommen Baratheon, and the cunning Queen Regent, Cersei Lannister. They spoke of the realm's weariness from years of war, and they spoke in hushed voices of dragons stirring across the narrow sea. Though no one yet had any proof that Daenerys Targaryen would land on Westerosi shores, yet the idea of a different hope, a different king, was enough to stoke the flames of a new rumor. If the North had rallied behind this man, might the rest of Westeros do the same? Jon had tried to quell such talk. His focus had been on the Night King, the undead army crawling closer to the wall, and the uncertain alliances needed to protect all living souls. Then there had been Samwell Tarly's gentle, earnest insistence that he read an account of births and secret weddings hidden away in the great library at the Citadel. A chance piece of parchment, a sealed record of Rhaegar Targaryen's private dealings, and the name Lyanna Stark scrawled beside his in the script of an old maester. The night Jon read that letter, the wind seemed to knock the breath from his lungs. The flicker of his candle might have just as well been a lightning bolt that split his world in two. Rhaegar Targaryen, the Prince of Dragonstone, had taken Lyanna to wife. That made Jon a Targaryen by birth, and a nephew, by blood, to Daenerys Stormborn. The truth had kept him up many nights, gnawing at his resolve. For a while, he told himself it didn't matter, that he had been raised as Ned Stark's bastard, and was content to remain, so if it meant serving the greater cause. And yet, there lingered that sense that the gods were moving pieces on their cosmic board, that everything had been orchestrated for this very moment. He never wanted the crown. The very idea of it felt like a weight around his neck, an impossible burden. As a child, he had never allowed himself to dream beyond being a brother of the Night's Watch. But the lines between dreams and destiny had blurred, and in the midst of the North's triumphant calls for him to lead, a raven arrived from the south. The letter bore the seal of the Red Keep, but the words inside were far from welcoming. It read like a veiled threat. The Lannisters recognized the North's new king as a traitor, and warned of the consequences. He was no true heir, no rightful lord of the Seven Kingdoms, merely a bastard sowing rebellion in the North. If he did not bend the knee to King Tommen, retribution would follow. At that letter, the lords of the North were incensed. Blood called for blood. But Jon did not hunger for war. He hungered for unity in the face of darkness. And so he did what he thought he must. He marched south to parley. Sansa stayed behind in Winterfell to keep the North secure and guard the seat of House Stark. She did not want him to go, but she understood. The journey south was fraught with tension. Jon was accompanied by Sir Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight, a man who had become his most trusted advisor in these trying times. A small retinue of loyal Northmen rode with them, ever wary of ambush. Ghost loped behind, vanishing into the shadows at the edges of camp. only to return and curl around Jon in the moments he felt most alone. They passed the scorched ruins of towns once loyal to House Stark, leveled by the Boltons. They saw the haunted faces of small folk who cowered behind broken fences, uncertain if these riders brought them salvation or another wave of horrors. Jon stopped and gave them bread when he could spare it, left extra provisions if they looked starving. While he could not fix their world in that moment, he could at least offer mercy. When he reached Moat Cailin, the ancient stronghold that guarded the neck of the north, he discovered an emissary from King Tommen waiting. The man wore crimson and gold, sweat shining on his brow in the sweltering southern heat. A row of carriages bore fresh gold for bribes, gifts of sweet wines, and words that promised pardons if Jon would only kneel. He listened patiently, his face giving away nothing. The emissary's voice wavered as he described the great generosity of the Lannisters, and Jon's men looked to him with suspicion. Finally, Jon spoke. "I've bent the knee once," he said, recalling that moment with Stannis. "It brought only more war and needless death for my people. Tell your king and your queen regent that I come to talk peace, but I will not kneel." The emissary's face paled, and he rode off hurriedly, leaving the gold-laden carriages behind in what seemed a desperate attempt at flattery. Jon ordered them left at Moat Cailin, warning that the Lannisters' gifts often came at too high a price. As the miles fell away beneath the hooves of their horses, the company approached the Riverlands. The toll of the War of the Five Kings still weighed heavy here. Farms lay deserted, charred skeletons of barns collapsing in on themselves. Fields once golden with wheat grew wild and untended. Here and there, a ragged band of outlaws or orphans wove their way across muddy roads, eyeing the small band from beneath hoods and tattered cloaks. Jon recognized the faint echo of heartbreak in their stares. They had seen enough lords come and go, pronouncing themselves saviors or conquerors, to know that few truly cared for the small folk. Ser Davos would ride alongside him, murmuring observations under his breath. "They suffer most, they always do," he would say. And Jon felt the gravity of those words in his bones. He had no illusions about the devastation that war would bring if he allowed it to happen again. But the threat from the south was overshadowed by the threat from beyond the wall. If only they would listen. The rumor of his Targaryen blood followed him, overshadowing even his known identity as the king in the north. Northmen did not quite know what to make of it, though they had sworn loyalty to Jon Snow, son of Ned Stark. Some even suspected it might be a trick by the Lannisters, a rumor to discredit his claim as a Stark. Others whispered that perhaps this was a sign from the old gods, that the Starks and Targaryens were meant to unite once more. Jon found it absurd to dwell on what might have been. His father, Ned Stark, was gone, and the father he had never known was a shadow on the pages of history. The best he could do was move forward, forging alliances that would hold back the tide of undead and protect the living. When he arrived in King's Landing for the parley, his retinue carefully arranged, unthreatening enough not to spook the Lannister guards but sufficient to protect him if things turned sour. He caught his first glimpse of the Red Keep's grandeur. The sun glinted off white stone towers and gilded spires, though the city surrounding them was far less regal. The stench of the overcrowded capital hit them long before they saw its famed walls. The smells of waste, unwashed bodies, and the pungent aroma of fish from the docks. Even in the best of times, King's Landing was a city that tested one's endurance. Jon and his men rode with straight backs, ignoring the jeers and stares of curious onlookers. Some recognized the direwolf sigil. Others called out that the bastard of Winterfell had come to kneel. Whispers of Targaryen rumors floated in the narrow alleys, lips curling with either scorn or something that looked suspiciously like hope. The Red Keep's throne room was bright with midday sun slanting through high windows. Jon recognized Cersei Lannister, resplendent in her black and gold gown, perched near the Iron Throne like a spider in its web. King Tommen sat upon the throne itself, a boy trying to wear the mantle of a ruler. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting from his mother to the visitors. Ser Davos stood at Jon's right side, watchful, hands folded over the pommel of his sword. The hiss of steel from Lannister guards was a faint threat on the edge of Jon's hearing, but he forced himself to remain steady, to to project an air of calm. It would do no good to show fear or anger. Cersei's smile was brittle. She did not mince words. We have no need of a rebel from the north. King Tommen sits the Iron Throne by right. You, Jon Snow, are no king but a traitor, unless you see reason. She paused, letting the silence hang thick in the hall. If your father were here, Ned Stark, he would counsel you to keep your head, bend the knee, or face the consequences. Jon's heart pounded, but he spoke evenly. Your Grace, he said, bowing just enough to show courtesy but not subservience. I came to speak of the danger that threatens us all. The Dead March from the far north. They are real, and if we do not band together, there will be no kingdom left to rule. I'm not here to steal your throne. I am here to plead for unity. For a moment, it seemed the boy king might speak, but Cersei placed a hand on Tommen's arm, silencing him. The Queen Regent's voice was as smooth as silk. What you speak of is a bedtime story for children. The walking dead do not concern us in King's Landing. We have real enemies, not fairy tales. House Tyrell wages war in the Reach. The Ironborn raid our coasts, and we have rumors of a Targaryen girl with dragons across the sea. You speak of unity, but your banner proclaims yourself a king. We have one king, and he is Tommen Baratheon, crowned by the will of the people. Swear your fealty, and perhaps we can discuss future alliances. Nice. Jon swallowed his frustration. The Night's Watch was sworn to defend the realm from threats beyond understanding. I was Lord Commander once. I have seen these creatures with my own eyes. I do not speak of rumor, Your Grace. If you do nothing, the realm will burn, and death will spread beyond the north to swallow us all. He realized he was clenching his fists. He forced his hands to relax. Ser Davos shifted at his side. Jon knew he should remain calm, but the knowledge of what was at stake weighed on him like a millstone. The Lannisters might believe they held all the cards, but the truth was, no one had any time to wage another war amongst themselves. He wondered what else he could say, how he could make them see reason. Then he saw Cersei's face, the glint in her eyes that whispered of dangerous cunning. And he understood her reason was not the same as his. She wanted to maintain power, to outmaneuver her enemies. The greater good was secondary. If it wasn't in her interest to ally with him, she would not. Nothing in her expression suggested she was swayed by tales of walking corpses. The parley ended in tension. No agreement was reached. Cersei gave a final warning. Kneel or face us. As Jon left the throne room, he could feel Tommen's troubled gaze following him. But the boy said nothing. The whispered rumor of Targaryen blood in Jon might have reached royal ears, and it occurred to him that this was another reason Cersei refused to show him any courtesy. A Targaryen Stark with the north behind him could be a threat indeed. They did not linger in the capital. Jon refused the honeyed invitations to stay in the Red Keep. Instead, he and his men found lodging in the north of the city, in a large stable once used by traveling knights. There, he held his own impromptu court of sorts, hearing the accounts of small folk whose living conditions grew worse each day. Food was scarce, and rumors spread that the crown's coffers were running dry after years of war and reckless spending. Soldiers of the crown roamed the streets, collecting harsh taxes, and any who defied them were labeled traitors. Jon listened quietly. This was not his city, these were not his people. Yet their pleas reminded him of the old vow he took at the Wall, to guard the realms of men. Did it truly matter if they hailed from the north or south? They were all living souls in need of protection. Ser Davos recognized his thoughts without his having to speak them. The Onion Knight placed a hand on Jon's shoulder and said simply, "You can't save them all, but we can try." Before they could resolve their next move, another raven came. A letter from Sansa. Her words were urgent. The lords in the north had received more ravens from southern houses, some from the Vale, some from the Riverlands, expressing discontent with the crown, offering to throw support behind a more worthy claimant. Whispers said that Tommen was a puppet for his mother, that House Lannister had overreached, taxing its subjects into poverty. The Tyrells were rumored to be on the brink of rebellion as well, furious at how their generous alliance had turned sour. If Jon could consolidate this discontent and present himself not just as the king in the north, but as a legitimate heir to the Iron Throne, through his Targaryen lineage, he might raise a coalition large enough to stand against the White Walkers. It was a gamble, and not one Jon relished. Still, the monstrous threat of the undead overshadowed all. If capturing the throne provided him the power to unite the kingdoms, then perhaps it was the right path. No matter how heavy his heart, his sense of duty to the living guided him forward. They planned carefully, sending out messages to key houses. The days and nights began to blend into a blur of secret meetings, forging alliances under the cloak of darkness. Jon's thoughts drifted occasionally to the woman across the sea who bore the name Targaryen, Daenerys Stormborn, said to have 3 dragons. But there was no sign that she had made landfall in Westeros yet, no news that she had shattered the chains in the east and was about to sail. Jon found himself both relieved and anxious at her absence. If she arrived, carrying the Targaryen name and living dragons, her own claim to the throne would overshadow his. But perhaps, if it came to it, they could forge a peace, an alliance for the sake of the living. He did not know enough about her to guess how she might respond to the claim of a nephew she never knew existed. Each dawn, he rose before the sun to train with his sword in the cramped courtyard. Sweat soaked his shirt, and the ring of steel on steel echoed in the silent morning. It was the one time he felt clarity, focusing on each breath, each movement, blocking out the swirl of politics and the unyielding question of his parentage. Ghost watched from a corner, bright red eyes unblinking. Ser Davos would appear to give a brief nod of greeting before retreating to handle the endless tasks of negotiation and planning. Jon found himself appreciating the older man's level head more than ever. He had become a father figure in a realm bereft of them. One night, a small contingent of northern lords arrived in King's Landing under cover of darkness. Among them were Lord Glover, Lady Mormont, and representatives from houses Serwyn and Tallhart. They hid themselves in a worn-down inn on the outskirts, away from prying eyes. The muddy yard and squeaking sign did little to reassure them of their safety, but it was discreet. Jon met them by candlelight in a cramped room that smelled of sour ale and old rushes. Lady Mormont, fierce as ever, wasted no time. "We've sworn fealty to the king in the north," she said, voice level, her small shoulders squared. "But now, we hear talk of you taking a different crown. You know the north has no love for southern thrones. What do you mean to do?" Jon explained calmly. "The threat from beyond the wall doesn't care for southern politics or northern pride. We need the entire realm united, or we stand no chance. We've tried reasoning with the crown as we are. They will not listen. If taking the Iron Throne is what it takes to unite Westeros, then that is what must be done." His gray eyes flickered with resolve. "But we must not lose ourselves in the process. If the North wishes to remain as it is after the war, I will not force you to kneel to anyone." Lord Glover's brows were knit, but he seemed thoughtful. "You're asking us to fight another war, so soon after the Boltons were defeated. Our men are weary. Our coffers are drained. The harvest is meager. Ser Davos stepped forward, an unassuming presence, but with a voice that carried wisdom. "Fighting the dead won't be easier if you're alone. We must rally the living before it's too late." A hush fell. Only the whisper of flames in the hearth, dancing shadows on the wooden walls, broke the silence. Lady Mormont pressed her lips together. "The North remembers," she said quietly, her eyes flicking to Jon. "If this is the path, then we stand with the king in the north." There was an earnestness in her voice that tugged at Jon's heart. It seemed to him that this girl, no older than 10, carried the might of 10,000 men in her conviction. One by one, the other lords echoed their agreement. They had endured too much loss to stand idle. At least with Jon, they believed in the old honesty of House Stark, even if that name might now sit side by side with Targaryen in some way. Over the next days, they strategized. Whispers were sent to houses in the Vale, the Reach, and even Dorne, though no one expected quick answers from the Sunspear. The Vale was more promising, as Petyr Baelish was known to have influence over young Lord Robin Arryn. But Baelish had ambitions of his own. It would be tricky to navigate. Jon spent hours in conference with these newly arrived northern lords, plotting how to handle the Lannisters. Tyrion, the dwarf rumored to have parted ways with his family long ago, was nowhere to be found in King's Landing. Some said he was across the sea with Daenerys. Jaime Lannister's whereabouts were uncertain. Some claimed he was leading the king's armies in the Crownlands. And Cersei, the real seat of power in the capital, made no secret that she would sooner see them all rot than surrender an inch of control. If Tommen retained any innocence, it was overshadowed by his mother's machinations. The tension in King's Landing grew with each passing hour. Lannister guards roamed the streets in greater numbers. Watchful eyes trailed Jon and his men whenever they ventured beyond their makeshift quarters. Then, one afternoon, a man wearing the sigil of House Tyrell arrived with a sealed message. He handed it to Jon with trembling fingers, as though the very act filled him with fear. His mouth was sealed shut by a sense of duty or dread. When Jon broke the wax and read the letter, a light of possibility sparked in his eyes. The Tyrells, it seemed, were done tolerating the Lannisters' hold on the throne. Their resources were vast, their armies formidable, and they were prepared to align with someone they believed could break the Lannister grip. In the letter's neat script was a phrase that struck him: "We know of your parentage, and we know you are not solely of Stark blood. A new age must come for Westeros." He read the words over and over, the weight of them sinking in. The Tyrells were referencing his rumored lineage as a Targaryen. If they were convinced, if they recognized him as more than just a bastard, then perhaps the realm was on the brink of turning. The Tyrell forces would be a formidable ally, especially if combined with the North and the Riverlands. With such backing, the idea of marching on King's Landing itself became less suicidal and more plausible. But that was a path lined with the bodies of the men and women who would die in such a conflict. Jon could already feel the ghosts of the future haunting him, reminding him that no matter how just his cause, war was never clean. While he mulled over this, fresh news arrived in the form of a scraggly man who claimed to have sailed across the narrow sea. He carried wild tales of dragons born from the ashes, an unsullied army, and a queen who freed slaves wherever she went. He claimed she was raising a fleet, that she had alliances among powerful houses in Essos, and that she was rumored to be heading west. Again, Daenerys Targaryen's name flitted through the conversation like a ghost. Jon wondered if the time might come when the realm would have to choose between two Targaryens, or if by some miracle they could stand together. For now, she was distant, a looming presence not yet manifest. His own war was here, in King's Landing, and beyond the wall. Some nights, lying awake on a straw pallet in the makeshift camp, Jon stared into the darkness, recalling the flight of ravens over Castle Black, the soft hush of snowfall on the battlements, the path from bastard to king in the north to potential claimant of the Iron Throne seemed unreal. In the flicker of the mind, he would see the face of Eddard Stark, the man who raised him with quiet kindness and unwavering integrity. He would wonder if Ned truly believed this day would come, or if he had only hoped to keep Jon safe. He would see the image of Lyanna Stark, a woman he never knew, spirited away by the Targaryen prince. He would think of Rhaegar Targaryen, the father he never asked for, who some say was a dreamer, a man who believed in prophecies. Jon felt no closeness to these strangers of the past, and yet they shaped every breath he now took. On the fourth night after the Tyrell letter arrived, Sansa reached him by Raven once more, urging him to act swiftly. She told him that the Umbers, who had once sided with the Boltons, were wavering in their allegiance to the Lannisters. They too might rally behind the rightful king in the north, and, if necessary, the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. Jon felt a swirl of relief. He remembered how Ramsay Bolton had used the Umbers' support to devastating effect. Now at least they might be won back to the fold. But Sansa's words ended with a warning. Time is not on our side. The dead will not wait for us to play our game of crowns. If you can bring the might of the southern houses under our banner, do it quickly, or return to the north. Whatever you do, do it with haste. Jon faced a terrible dilemma. To claim the Iron Throne, he would need to wage war here, in the south, toppling Tommen's rule. The north could not hold out indefinitely against the undead if they marched in full force. especially not without the support of the southern armies. But every day he spent in King's Landing was a day lost in preparations for the true war. Sir Davos sensed his torment. They conversed in private, standing in the faint moonlight by the crumbling city walls. The salt of the Blackwater Bay lingered in the cool air. "You have to make a decision, lad," Sir Davos said gently. "If the southern houses are willing to rally to you now, you could march on the Red Keep. You could claim the throne. But you know what that means. Men will die by the thousands. Even if the realm is united under you, will we have enough strength left to face the armies of the dead?" Jon's hands curled around the cold stone of the wall's parapet, his eyes scanning the darkness. "I don't know," he admitted. "But if I turn my back on this chance, the Lannisters will not stand aside for us to handle the war beyond the wall. They will turn on the north, devouring our resources, forcing us to fight them while the dead slip past." The soft night wind ruffled his dark hair, carrying with it the distant sound of waves lapping against the harbor. "There must be a better way," he murmured. "But what?" "Diplomacy." Cersei refused reason. "A direct confrontation? It would be a bloodbath." And each raven from Sansa sounded more urgent, reminding him that time was short. The leaders of the houses he had gathered, Tyrell, Tully remnants, even some Stormlanders disillusioned with the Lannisters, waited for his command. They looked to him as if he held the key to saving the realm. Once he would have scoffed at the thought. Now, it weighed on him like chain links, forging a noose around his neck. He remembered the conversations he had with Melisandre, the Red Woman, speaking of prophecies about Azor Ahai, the prince who was promised. He had never been one to believe wholeheartedly in prophecy, but he saw how these ideas swayed men's hearts. People yearned for a savior, a light in the darkness. And now that darkness was growing each day, in the shape of an endless undead horde. If wearing a crown was the only way to shepherd them all toward survival, then he might have to do it. Slowly, reluctantly, he allowed himself to imagine that seat of melted swords, the Iron Throne, and how it might change everything. At dawn, he called a meeting with the Northern Lords and the few Southern allies who had secretly joined him. They clustered around a large wooden table, a single candle flickering. He spoke with unwavering calm. "If we march on the Red Keep, it won't be an easy fight. The Lannister army is battle-tested, and the gold they carry can buy many sellswords. But we have the numbers from the north, and we have House Tyrell's strength. The question is, do we commit to this path now, or do we return to fortify the north and pray that when the dead come, we can survive on our own?" The tension was palpable. Lord Glover exchanged looks with Lady Mormont. The Tyrell envoy, a steward for Olenna Tyrell, stepped forward and bowed. "My lady believes the Lannisters will only grow bolder if you show weakness," he said. "But she also believes we should minimize bloodshed where possible. If King Tommen can be made to surrender, we should attempt it. If not..." He did not finish the sentence. Everyone in the room knew war was the next step. Jon looked to each face, seeing a mixture of resolve and fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sound of trumpets suddenly cut through the air. Shouts echoed from outside the inn, and the clang of steel rose up as if 1,000 swords had clashed at once. Ghost, at Jon's side, let out a low growl, his hackles raised. Sir Davos peered through a grimy window. "Something's happening in the streets," he said. "Seems the Lannisters are mobilizing." Jon nodded sharply. "We knew it could come to this. Everyone, gear up. We need to see what's going on out there." He turned to the men. "Lord Glover, gather your warriors. Lady Mormont, keep your men close. We'll move as one and avoid getting pinned down." Within minutes, they were armed and ready. Swords belted at their hips, armor strapped tight. Jon's breath was steady, though his pulse hammered. The group stepped into a street, choked with people scurrying in all directions. Lannister guards were forming barricades at major intersections, halberds and pikes bristling in the early morning light. Smoke rose from somewhere deeper in the city. The sky was tinted pink by the rising sun. But it might as well have been red for all the violence simmering in the air. "King Tommen has declared martial law," someone shouted from the crowd. A ragged man with a bloody bandage wrapped around his head. He says there's a plot to overthrow him. The streets aren't safe. Others took up the cry, hurling curses at the Lannisters, who responded by beating on shields or jabbing their pikes to clear the people out. Jon cursed under his breath. So it had come to this. Clearly the crown had caught wind of the Tyrell betrayal or discovered the presence of northern lords in the city. Maybe Cersei wanted to force his hand. The city would become a battleground if they stayed. The small folk would be the ones to suffer first. Davos, Jon said quietly, stepping closer. We either fight our way to the Red Keep now or retreat. If we take too long, we'll be surrounded, and we'll lose the chance to take the throne without a siege. But if we do it, the streets will run red. Then, Ser Davos' eyes were troubled. Wars come for us, whether we want it or not. He glanced around at the frightened civilians. We can't let them get trapped in the crossfire. Jon pressed his lips into a thin line. He saw the anguish on Ser Davos' face and felt it in his own heart. But what choice was left? The Lannisters had forced it. Perhaps Cersei desired a public confrontation that she could twist into a propaganda victory. But perhaps there was also a chance, however slim, that King Tommen himself might see reason. From the corner of his eye, Jon spotted a group of Lannister guards moving through the throng. They carried spears upright, but the threat was clear. They were closing in on the cluster of Northmen and Tyrell envoys. Lady Mormont, standing near him, squared her small shoulders, hand on the hilt of her dagger. Jon had a moment's pang of regret at seeing such a young girl forced into a battlefield once again. He took a step forward. "We will not strike first," he called loudly to his men, though he could see the tension in their faces. The guards halted, forming a line, spears at the ready. An officer in Lannister red and gold glared at them. "You are all ordered to lay down your arms in the name of King Tommen," the officer shouted. His voice trembled slightly. Whether from fear or fanatic loyalty was unclear. Surrender or face justice. Jon felt the hush of impending violence. He could practically taste the iron tang of blood in the air. He heard the scuffle of boots behind him. His men were ready to defend themselves. Before anyone could speak further, a stone flew from the crowd of onlookers, striking a Lannister guard on the temple. He stumbled, cursing, and the line of spears lurched forward in a wave of confusion. "Hold!" Jon shouted, but it was too late. Chaos erupted. Steel clashed. Civilians screamed, diving for cover behind barrels, wagons, anything. The Lannister guards lunged, forcing the Northmen to defend themselves. The Tyrell men drew blades, and in seconds the narrow street became a churn of blood and screams. Ghost leapt with a savage snarl, toppling one guard, who tried to thrust a spear at Jon's back. Ser Davos was at Jon's side, parrying a blow. Jon felt his instincts take over, the training of years with a sword guiding his hand. He pushed the spear thrust aside, stepping inside the guard's reach and slamming his pommel into the man's temple. More guards poured in from behind the line, and the ring of steel on steel became deafening. The stench of sweat and blood thickened. The press of bodies was tight, leaving little room to maneuver. Jon saw Lady Mormont's men forming a protective circle around her. Lord Glover was leading a second group, trying to break free and clear a path. Amid the chaos, horns sounded to the south, echoing across the city. Jon risked a glance and saw banners rising over the rooftops, Tyrell green and gold. Olenna's forces were moving, though whether to storm the Red Keep or simply rescue their envoys was unclear. The Lannisters in the street faltered, some looking to the distant banners with alarm. More horns blared in response. This time from the castle, a martial cry that turned the city's morning stillness into a clarion call for war. People fled, shrieking as cavalry thundered through side streets, banners snapping behind them. Ser Davos, battered but unbowed, shouted over the din, "Jon, we have to get out of this damn street before we're surrounded." Jon knew he was right. They could not remain pinned here. Their only hope was to find open ground or a defensible position. They had not intended to wage full war in the cramped alleys of King's Landing, but that war had found them. With a quick command, he urged those following him to push north, toward the city gates if possible. Another part of him knew that retreating might mean losing their foothold in the city. but to remain was to be caught in a net of Lannister spears. He cut down a guard who lunged at him with a sword. The clash reverberated along Jon's arms, and he fought to keep his balance on the slick cobblestones. The guard collapsed, moaning. Another rushed forward. This was no glorious duel. It was savage and immediate, the swirl of movement and fear. Jon felt the rush of violence that once took him beyond the wall, fighting wildlings and whites alike. Here, though, the men who died had families and loyalties no less real than his own. It weighed on him, even as he parried blow after blow. Ghost's snarl sounded near his ankles, the dire wolf weaving through the melee with deadly grace. At last, a gap opened in the Lannister ranks, and Jon's group surged forward. Bodies lay strewn across the cobbles, streams of red trickling into the gutters. The wailing of wounded men and bystanders rose behind them. Jon caught a glimpse of Sir Davos behind him, his face pale but set with determination, and Lady Mormont, her eyes burning with outraged fury at the pointless carnage. They pressed on, driving north, though where this path would lead them, Jon could not yet know. War had come to King's Landing, and he was in the center of it. His mind spun as he ran, heart pounding, searching for some advantage in this madness. If he could reach Tommen, or even the Red Keep, maybe there was a chance, some fleeting hope, to force a peace. But it seemed peace had slipped away, lost in the rising storm of swords. And so he charged onward, uncertain if he was heading toward the Iron Throne, or merely deeper into the jaws of a battle that might devour them all. In the back of his mind, he wondered if Daenerys Targaryen was sailing across the sea at this very moment, destined to find nothing but ash and ruin when she arrived. The thought quickened his pace. He would not let the realm fall into darkness without fighting to the last. If he must become king to save it, then so be it. And as the roar of conflict filled his ears, he clenched his jaw, prepared to face whatever fate the gods had set in motion. Jon led his embattled retinue through the twisting side streets, the din of clashing steel and frightened cries echoing through every alleyway of King's Landing. Smoke drifted across the sky, its tendrils turned gold by the early morning sun. In the uneven light, everything took on an otherworldly haze. Ghost prowled near Jon's heels, his ears flattened against his skull. A sense of tight, urgent desperation gripped them all. They skirted abandoned wagons, half-toppled market stalls, and piles of refuse that the city had neglected to clear. At every turn, there was a chance that another knot of Lannister guards would appear, brandishing steel and demanding submission. Much of the city's small folk had melted away into doorways or fled entirely into cramped cellars, leaving the streets bare but for the fighters and the bodies of the fallen. The sour tang of blood and fear filled Jon's nostrils. The war they'd hoped to avoid was now a savage reality. Sir Davos motioned for them to pause at a narrow intersection. They pressed themselves against the leaning walls of an old tavern, paint peeling from its sign. The Tyrell envoy, a gaunt man wearing the sigil of the Golden Rose on his cloak, struggled to catch his breath. Behind him, a handful of Tyrell soldiers braced their polearms, their eyes darting in every direction. From the shadows, Lady Mormont stood in a small knot of her Bear Island men, holding a short sword in one hand and a battered shield in the other. Her cheeks were flushed with the heat of battle, and she looked ready to prove herself, though she was hardly more than a child. Jon glanced over them, assessing their condition. Most wore minor cuts or bruises, but they were still intact. "Anyone see Lord Glover?" he asked quietly. One of the northern soldiers shook his head. He led a group up that way. He pointed to where the street curved north. "Some Lannisters cut between us. Might have forced him into another alley." Jon exhaled slowly. "We'll try to circle around and find him. We can't leave any of our allies behind." Ghost let out a low growl, and Jon stroked the direwolf's neck, feeling the tension in the creature's muscles. "We'll do this street by street if we must. But the longer we linger here, the tighter their net becomes." Across the way, Sir Davos peered around the corner, frowning. "They're forming blockades on the main avenues near what's left of the city watch. I saw men in red cloaks dragging sharpened stakes and barrels to seal off routes leading toward the Red Keep. All to trap us," Lady Mormont murmured, her voice taut. Sir Davos shrugged grimly. Likely to keep the Tyrell forces from advancing further. Word must be out that House Tyrell has turned on the crown. The Lannisters aren't going to let them sweep in unchallenged. And that means we're caught in the middle, as well. Damn. Jon could picture the map of King's Landing in his mind. The city gates to the north, the Blackwater Bay to the south and east, the looming Red Keep perched on Aegon's high hill. Everywhere in between sprawled twisting streets and half-flooded slums. Finding a path through this chaos to either meet with the Tyrell main host or corner Tommen for negotiations would be an exhausting, dangerous task. But if they kept scattering and fighting skirmishes, they'd be overrun. He turned to the Tyrell envoy, keeping his voice calm. Your army flew banners near the southern edge of the city. Do you know where your commanders plan to converge? The man swallowed, sweat running down his brow. They were to move along the Roserwad and break through the Gate of the Gods if possible. But the Lannisters anticipated it. They've got archers on the walls, or so I've heard. My lady intended to open negotiations once we showed our strength, but it's all gone to fire and blood out there. Jon grimaced. If the Tyrells are forced into a prolonged siege, they'll have no choice but to let the city starve or storm it entirely. With the small folk still here, the death toll will be enormous. A hush fell. The soldiers around them shifted on their feet, eyes full of dread. Nobody wanted that on their conscience. To seize the capital through a protracted siege would make them no better than the so-called Mad King, who had once threatened to burn the city, or the Lannisters who sacked it. Jon felt a raw impatience coil in his gut. He hadn't come south to butcher innocents, but to unite a realm threatened by an unimaginable horror. Footsteps echoed. A shape darted down a side alley and skidded to a halt near Jon's group. Jon and Sir Davos raised their swords, but paused when they recognized an out-of-breath soldier wearing the sigil of House Glover. Fresh cuts traced the man's cheeks. My lord, he gasped, doubling over. Lord Glover, we were ambushed. Trapped in a narrow lane. Guards everywhere. He told me to find you to ask for help. Jon's jaw set. Where is he? The soldier motioned with a shaking hand. 2 streets over, near the old smithy by the water troughs. They're holding off a whole squad of Lannisters behind a row of overturned carts, but it won't last. Jon did not hesitate. Take me there. Sir Davos began to object, but Jon shook his head. We're not leaving anyone to fend for themselves. Lady Mormont, you and your men follow behind us. Keep a perimeter so we're not flanked. Davos, watch for any movement from side alleys. Tyrell men, hold the rear. Let's move. Let them see. They set out at a quick march, weaving around corners, ducking under laundry lines sagging between ramshackle buildings. The city moaned like a wounded beast. Shouts, screams, distant horns, and the crackle of flames that leapt from rooftop to rooftop. A pall of smoke drifted overhead, giving the sunlight an eerie orange hue. Now and then, they passed bodies lying in the street, some wearing Lannister colors, others local sellswords who had joined the fray for coin. The swirl of uncertainty made every step precarious. Rounding a final corner, they heard the distinct clang of steel meeting steel. The soldier who guided them pointed toward an old smithy with a sagging roof. Splintered wooden carts lay strewn about, forming a makeshift barricade. Behind it, Jon glimpsed flashes of northern cloaks. Lord Glover's men pressed tight, fending off repeated thrusts from Lannister spears. The red and gold cloaks advanced in a wedge formation, shields held aloft, trying to force the defenders into a corner. Lord Glover himself stood at the center, bellowing encouragement, though a smear of blood ran down the side of his face. Jon did not slow. With me, he yelled, raising Longclaw Dotty. He and Ghost charged forward. Lady Mormont and the others fanned out behind him. The Lannister soldiers, caught off guard by the sudden rush from behind, half-turned to meet the new threat. That momentary hesitation cost them. Jon slammed into their flank, cutting down the first guard who raised his spear too late. The man toppled with a cry. Ghost lunged at another soldier's arm, teeth bared, and wrenched him off balance. Steel sang as Sir Davos and the Tyrell envoy waded in, thrusting and parrying. Lady Mormont's men roared, crashing into the Lannister line. A chaos of swords, Curses and the shriek of metal battered Joan's senses. He fought mechanically, careful not to leave his side exposed. One guard feinted left, but Jon stepped into the blow, driving the crossguard of Longclaw under the man's chin. He heard a choking gasp, then the soldier dropped. In moments, the Lannister wedge was broken. Some tried to retreat, stumbling over the debris of the carts. A few were cut down from behind by the furious Northmen. Ghost harried a fleeing guard, snapping at his legs. Lord Glover clambered over an overturned cart, face dark with anger. A wide gash seamed his cheek. He pressed a hand to it, flinching as he spoke to Jon. "You got here just in time," he panted. "Couldn't hold them much longer. They seem to be combing every street now, looking to root us out." Jon reached out, clapping the man's shoulder in relief. "We'll find you medical attention later. For now, we need to regroup and get out of these tight alleys. The Lannisters are pinning us down." "Daenerys." Lord Glover nodded. "Agreed." Blood spattered the cobblestones at Jon's feet. He looked around for any more threats, but the few Lannister soldiers who remained had scattered, leaving only the dead and dying behind. The stench was overwhelming, an awful tang mixing with the smoke. A few battered Northmen emerged from behind broken barrels to join Jon's band. As they gathered, they numbered maybe 36 in total. Clearly a fraction of the full force they'd once had in King's Landing. How many others were cut off or forced to retreat? Jon could only guess. A faint crash echoed from somewhere to the east, followed by triumphant shouts. Jon peered down the lane, but smoke concealed the distance. "We need a strategy," he muttered, turning back to Sir Davos. "Wandering through these streets blind is suicide. We either link up with the Tyrell host or find a path to the Red Keep. Right now, we're doing neither effectively." Sir Davos wiped sweat from his brow. "A direct assault on the castle would be madness unless we had the Tyrells at our back, and a good number of them, too. Are we sure the Tyrell main force is inside the walls yet?" "Nay, she." The Tyrell envoy grimaced. "I'm not entirely certain. They plan to breach at dawn if they could. Perhaps they've partially succeeded, but large sections of the host might still be outside. The gold cloaks closed the gates behind them, I'm sure." Lord Glover grunted. "We can't sit here, waiting to be hunted down. Let's move west, away from the main thoroughfares. If we reach the Lion's Gate or somewhere near the Mud Gate, we might find a pocket of Tyrell soldiers pushing in." Jon nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, we'll try to skirt the worst of the fighting, link up with the Tyrells, and decide our next step. Keep your weapons ready. We might have to cut through any Lannister squads blocking our path." "Ben said to me." "Endo." He gestured for the group to move. With Lord Glover's battered men now reinforcing them, they trudged west, forging a new route through back alleys where the tall, crooked buildings nearly touched overhead. Brick walls and shuttered windows loomed on either side. The hush here was eerie, an almost unnatural stillness, as though the city held its breath. Now and then, a distant scream or clash of arms shattered the quiet. Time stretched. They wound around corners and paused often to listen for marching boots. Beneath the smoke's haze, Jon glimpsed startled faces peering from shutter cracks as families cowered in their homes. Every inch of him felt tight with tension, waiting for the next ambush to erupt. Ghost padded silently, muzzle smeared with blood from earlier fighting. Lady Mormont walked near him, eyes alert, her young face set in fierce concentration. It was nearing midday, though the sky remained obscured. Jon's stomach was hollow, but there was no time for food. The city's labyrinth twisted them about, until at last they heard a sudden uproar of voices beyond a tall wooden fence. The fence stood behind a row of neglected hovels, boards crisscrossed and hammered together. A faint green and gold banner flapped above it, visible where the boards gapped near the top. "Deutsch?" Jon motioned for quiet. He edged closer and peered through a crack in the fence. Beyond, he saw a cramped courtyard littered with splintered crates. At least 24 Tyrell soldiers were there, reorganizing themselves around an older knight wearing gilded armor. Several lay wounded on the ground, while others paced anxiously, weapons in hand. None of them noticed Jon's presence. "Tyrell knights," Jon murmured to the envoy, who nodded in recognition. One of Lady Olenna's sworn men, I believe. The envoy sounded relieved. This must be a fallback point. Let's approach carefully. They made their way around to a small gate, jammed shut by debris. Together, a few Northmen shoved aside the broken timbers, allowing the door to groan open. The Tyrell soldiers spun to face them, swords raised until someone cried out, "They're allies!" Almost at once, caution gave way to cautious relief. The older knight stepped forward, visor lifted to reveal a grizzled face. "Who leads you?" he demanded. Jon sheathed Longclaw slowly, palms out to show no ill intent. "Jon Snow, king in the north." The words still felt strange on his tongue, but he needed them now to convey authority. "We've been separated from the rest of our forces. Where is Lady Olenna, and the rest of your host?" The knight's grim expression softened a fraction. "Storming the city from 3 gates, but the Lannisters pulled back and set traps. We found ourselves pinned here, so we fortified. The rest, I can't say for certain. There's fighting along the main roads, definitely near the Street of Steel and Flea Bottom. The Crown's men are doing everything they can to keep us from pushing closer to the keep." The courtyard smelled of sweat and desperation. A few Tyrell archers had stationed themselves on the rooftops above, scanning for threats. The older knight gestured for Jon and his retinue to come further inside, away from prying eyes. Some of the Tyrell men parted grudgingly to make space, still eyeing the newcomers with wariness. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone was exhausted, and trust was in short supply. Jon noticed the moans of the wounded scattered across the courtyard. 2 Tyrell healers knelt over them, pressing bandages to bleeding wounds. One soldier had lost an arm in the fighting. Another seemed near death, his breath raspy. Lady Mormont approached them, as though searching for a way to help, but there was precious little she could do besides offer what meager supplies they carried. Sir Davos addressed the knight with a respectful tilt of his head. "We need to break this stalemate, or all we'll accomplish is filling the gutters with corpses. Has your lady set any plan to parley with King Tommen?" A harsh laugh escaped the knight. "Sir, the time for parley seems to have passed. Her Grace the Queen Regent has no desire to talk. The Red Keep is locked down. We've tried sending envoys, but none returned. Lady Olenna might still hold out hope for a negotiation, but if the Lannisters keep slaughtering our men, she'll not hesitate to retaliate in kind." "Baterar." A flicker of pain crossed Jon's face. He exchanged a glance with Sir Davos. There was no easy way out. "If we fight all day by dusk, half this city could be on fire," Jon said quietly. "The small folk will suffer most. We need to find Tommen or the Queen Regent. If I can speak to the Boy King face to face, maybe we can avoid all-out ruin." Lord Glover stepped in. "Not if Cersei Lannister has anything to say about it. She'd see us all burn first." "That might be," Jon agreed. "But I won't let that keep me from trying." The older Tyrell knight rubbed a hand across his stubbled chin. "If you aim to force a meeting with King Tommen, you'll have to reach the keep itself. Past the Royal Guard, the gold cloaks, and any number of archers on the battlements. That's a death sentence unless you bring a substantial force. Our men here are in no condition for an all-out assault." From the rooftop, one of the archers suddenly called down, voice sharp, "Movement on the street. Lannister patrol, heading this way." Down. At once, the courtyard stiffened. A hush fell as men readied their weapons and crouched behind barrels, crates, or the ragged fence. Ghost trotted to Jon's side, fur bristling. Jon found himself crouching behind a stack of broken casks, peering through a gap in the boards. Beyond lay a broad avenue, half obscured by drifting smoke. The sound of boots echoed. Through the haze, a column of Lannister men appeared, marching in formation. They carried pikes, and at their head rode a mounted knight in gleaming armor. Several crossbowmen brought up the rear, scanning the sides of the street warily. Their discipline was evident. These were not frightened new recruits, but hardened veterans. Jon counted at least 4 dozen. Enough to make any direct confrontation costly. With only a rickety fence and a handful of archers for cover, the Tyrell northern band risked being pinned down. Lady Mormont looked up at Jon questioningly. She was brave but not reckless. Jon weighed their options. If they remained hidden, the patrol might pass by, but that would trap them here indefinitely. On the other hand, if they ambushed the patrol, they might clear the street and open a path, but an ambush risked drawing reinforcements. He motioned for silence, waiting to see if the patrol would continue without noticing the courtyard. The knight at the front pulled his horse to a slow walk, scanning the buildings on either side with a keen eye. Jon held his breath. The courtyard was partially concealed, but not perfectly. A poorly hidden track of footprints near the gate might give them away. Suddenly, the Lannister knight signaled a halt. He turned his horse toward the fence, lifting his visor. In a loud voice he called, "Show yourselves! We know someone's in there. No use hiding like rats. Come out, and you might receive the king's mercy." A stillness fell. Jon glanced at Sir Davos, who shook his head, face grim. The Tyrell knight beside them mouthed, "We can't surrender, my lord. If we do, they'll butcher our wounded. We fight." Jon clenched his jaw. He nodded once, then whispered, "Archers, get ready, on my command." The bowmen perched on the rooftops drew their strings taut. Tension radiated in the hush, hearts pounding in unison. The Lannister knight edged his horse closer to the fence. "Last chance, throw down your swords." A few of his soldiers advanced, pikes leveled, aiming to pry the fence apart. Jon felt the moment crystallize. He lifted his hand silently, bracing himself. The courtyard was still as a grave. Then the Lannister knight kicked his horse forward, and in that split second, Jon dropped his hand. Arrows whistled from the rooftop. 3 found their marks, striking the front line of Lannister pikemen. 2 men collapsed immediately, bolts lodged in throats or underarms. Another staggered back, bellowing in pain. The rest of the formation roared, raising shields. The knight on horseback jerked his reins, his horse rearing in alarm. Tyrell men burst from the courtyard, spears leveled, while the Northmen followed, swords lifted high. Jon led them, stepping over the broken fence, long claw in hand. Shouts echoed off the stone walls. The Lannister crossbowmen rushed to load their weapons, but the Tyrell archers rained more arrows upon them. Ghosts darted out, savage and swift, lunging at a soldier's thigh. Jon charged the disoriented front line, swinging his blade at the first shield in his path. Steel met oak. He used his momentum to knock the shield aside and thrust, feeling the jolt as Longclaw found flesh. The Lannister soldier grunted and folded, but the patrol regrouped with surprising speed, forming a bristling half-circle of pikes. A crossbow bolt zipped past Jon's ear, thudding into the ground behind him. He ducked low. The older Tyrell knight hammered a Lannister shield with his mace, while Sir Davos ducked under another pike, slicing at the soldier's legs. Lady Mormont, small though she was, jammed her blade into a gap in an armored thigh, forcing a man to collapse with a cry. The swirl of violence took over, senses reduced to glimpses of blood and the thunder of hearts pounding. Jon found himself face to face with the Lannister knight on horseback. Dodging, the man scowled behind his visor, spurring the horse forward, sword angled to strike. Jon threw himself aside just as the blade whistled past, and Ghost darted in, snapping at the horse's forelegs. The animal shrieked, rearing again. The knight struggled to regain control. Seizing the moment, Jon lunged, driving Longclaw up under the horse's mail. The wounded beast bucked and collapsed, sending the knight sprawling. Within seconds, Tyrell spearmen set upon him. The knight was quickly disarmed, one of the spears pressed to his throat. The Lannisters' formation cracked under the combined assault from both sides. Some tried to flee down the avenue, but archers loosed a final volley, cutting down the stragglers. Within moments, the fight was over. A hush settled again, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors and the groans of the dying. Broken pikes littered the cobbles, and blood ran in dark streaks through the dust. Jon stood there, chest heaving, feeling a surge of regret at each life lost. He had never wanted more battles like these, never wanted to spill yet more Westerosi blood. Yet the path to the throne, and more importantly the path to unit, seemed paved in the dead. There was no time to dwell. He pulled his gaze from the bodies and looked at the battered group around him. A few Tyrell men nursed new injuries, but at least they still stood. The older knight, breathing hard, gave Jon a curt nod of acknowledgement. "We can't linger or they'll send more," Jon said. "Gather weapons and anything useful. Then we move." Ser Davos approached, holding the Lannister knight's sword. The knight, pinned by two spearmen, glared with undisguised hate, a shallow cut trickling blood across his forehead. "What do we do with him?" Davos asked, eyeing the captive with obvious distaste. Jon hesitated. Every man or woman they spared could betray their position. Yet, executing captives in cold blood was not the kind of king he wanted to be. A war might demand it, but he hated the taste of such cruelty. "Bind him, gag him, leave him behind." The knight spat a curse. "You'll regret this, bastard." Cersei, a swift blow from a Tyrell soldier's pommel cut his words short. They bound him, ignoring his muffled protests, and dragged him toward a corner. One of the archers found rope to secure his wrists. The rest of Jon's men gathered what they could. Spare weapons, crossbows, even a satchel of rations from the Lannister supply packs. Then they resumed their march west. The wide avenue stretched before them, partially obscured by drifting smoke. Far off, a series of muted thunderclaps suggested more fighting. Overhead, the sun had climbed higher, now casting harsh light on battered rooftops. Some buildings were ablaze. Flames licked at timbers, sending cinders whirling into the sky. They passed a deserted market square where overturned tables spilled fruit and salted fish across the stones. Swarmed by flies, a couple of starving dogs slunk behind heaps of refuse, their hackles raised at the passing soldiers. Jon felt each step weigh heavier on his soul. This was King's Landing in the throes of war, the same city that had cheered for Robert Baratheon's victory against the Targaryens decades ago. The same city that had seen Joffrey crowned. Now, it was reduced to chaos and fear. He thought of Sansa's warnings in her letters. Time was short. The army of the dead drew ever closer. How many men would be left to defend the realm once they finished tearing each other apart? At last, they spotted a cluster of green and gold banners rippling ahead of them, near what looked like a half-collapsed stone gatehouse. As they approached, a row of Tyrell spears bristled at their presence. Jon held up a hand, calling out that they were allies. Slowly, the spears lowered, revealing a small pocket of Tyrell troops who had pushed this far. A second glance told Jon they'd paid a heavy price. Bodies in green livery lay sprawled under the gate arch, blood congealing. The smell of death was stifling. An officer stepped forward, blinking away soot. He had the bearing of someone in command, but was youthful, with a patchy beard. His eyes flicked over Jon's group. "Are you all that's left of the Northerners in this district?" Jon shook his head. "There may be more scattered throughout the city. Our numbers are small, though." "Where is Lady Olenna? Or Mace Tyrell? Have they breached the walls?" "No. Mace Tyrell is leading the main host outside the city, still trying to take the walls. A portion of our force entered through a postern gate down by the river, but we've met stiff resistance. The Lannisters are well entrenched. As for Lady Olenna, last I heard she was safe with the supply train, but news is scarce." He spat, wiping soot from his mouth. "Cersei wants to bleed us at every turn. If we can't open the city gates for our full host, we might have to pull back. Word is, the Lannisters have catapults on the inner battlements, threatening to burn half the city if we push forward." No. Jon's heart sank. So it had devolved into a siege after all. The officers' men parted, revealing the battered remains of one such catapult, presumably destroyed by the Tyrell incursion here. But if others remained intact closer to the keep, then all the Lannisters needed was a single mad command from Cersei to fling wildfire into the streets. Jon recalled rumors of wildfire caches hidden beneath the city. His father had once told him stories of the Mad King's final plot, to ignite them all, and how Jaime Lannister had intervened. If Cersei was half as ruthless, King's Landing was a tinderbox. The nightmares could become reality. He turned to Ser Davos and the Tyrell Knight, who had come this far with him. "We have to find a way to reach Tommen before it's too late. This can't go on. Innocents are caught in the middle." Lord Glover frowned. "That means fighting our way to the keep or finding some secret path." Does anyone here know the city's hidden ways? His voice held a note of frustration. Even if we do get to the Red Keep, it could be a trap. From the ragged group of Tyrell soldiers, a quiet voice spoke up. It belonged to a woman with a bandaged arm. She was slight of build, her face smudged with grime. "I was born in King's Landing," she said, glancing around warily. "I'm no expert, but I do know of a couple of sewer tunnels that lead near the keep's outer walls. Some smugglers use them. If they aren't collapsed or guarded, we might slip inside." A flicker of hope lit Sir Davos' eyes. "Smugglers' tunnels, you say? That's a language I speak." He turned to Jon. "It could be our best bet to bypass the main defenses." Jon considered it. "We'd have to leave most of the troops here. A large force would never slip through unseen. But a small group, myself, perhaps a handful, could attempt to reach the keep, find Tommen, and press him to yield. Or at least take him into protective custody. If the king is removed from Cersei's influence, we might force a ceasefire." Lord Glover looked unsettled. "It's risky. If you're captured or killed, the North will be without its king. We can't lose you." But Jon's mind was made up. "We can't remain locked in stalemate. Sansa's ravens speak of the White Walkers gathering. Every day we delay is a day lost. I'll take the risk. Davos, you've smuggled men through impossible odds before. We'll pick a small team." Sir Davos drew a careful breath, then nodded. "Aye. I'll see us through if it's possible." They quickly decided who would go. Jon, Davos, the woman who knew the tunnels. Her name was Yessa, as they learned, and 2 others from the north who had proven steady in a fight. Lady Mormont insisted on accompanying them, but Jon gently refused. "Your place is with your men, leading them. If something happens to me, you represent House Stark in the North's name." Lady Mormont pursed her lips, a flash of fury in her young eyes, but said nothing. It was clear she hated being left behind, but she did not press the issue. She merely folded her arms and nodded stiffly, giving Jon a final glare that conveyed both her loyalty and her pride. Lord Glover spoke then, voice low. "If you succeed, send a signal if you can. Some sign that Tommen surrendered. We'll hold our position here as long as we're able. But if the city threatens to burn, we'll have to pull back to spare our men." "Done." Jon clasped the man's forearm in a sign of camaraderie. "Do what you must. We'll try to end this." No more words were needed. Time was pressing, and every moment could bring another wave of carnage. They left the small Tyrell encampment behind, picking their way through half-ruined alleys at Yessa's direction. She told them that near the Hook, a cramped wharf district by the Blackwater, there was an old drainage outlet used by smugglers. King's Landing had many sewers, some older than the Targaryen conquest itself. A warren beneath the city. Their group of 5 moved swiftly, heads low, avoiding the main roads. Twice they heard the thunder of cavalry or the clash of swords, but they skirted each threat. The acrid taste of smoke never left Jon's tongue. Flames danced across rooftops in the distance. But here, the buildings were largely intact. They passed a set of wide stone steps leading down to the river, but Yessa waved them away, indicating that the drainage outlet lay further on, by a tangle of fishing nets and rotted posts. Finally, they arrived at a secluded bank. The reek of stagnant water and rotting fish assaulted them. A low stone arch jutted from the mossy embankment, black water trickling out. Broken crates and debris choked the canal around it. Jon wrinkled his nose. "This is the entrance," one of the Northmen muttered, eyeing the algae-slick arch with distaste. Yessa nodded. "It's not pretty, but it'll do." They climbed down carefully, boots slipping on wet stones. Sir Davos tested the depth of the water with a short spear, finding it knee-high. Ghost sniffed at the rancid smell, ears drooping, but he followed Jon, stepping gingerly through the muck. Yessa explained that the tunnel curved under part of the city and branched into older passageways beneath the Hill of Rhaenys, not far from the Red Keep's dungeons. "We have to be careful," she said. "Some smugglers rig traps to keep out thieves, and the Lannisters might have stationed guards below." Nym saw. Their footsteps echoed in the cramped tunnel. Darkness closed around them, broken only by a single torch Sir Davos carried. The walls were slick with filth, the floor strewn with jagged stones. The stench was nearly overpowering. Jon forced himself to breathe shallowly. The Northmen behind him muttered curses as they stumbled over unseen obstructions. Despite the gloom, Yessa led them with surprising assurance. She'd evidently traveled this path before. Their progress was slow but steady. Now and then they heard distant echoes, rushing water, the scuttling of rats, or maybe footsteps on a higher level. Once, they thought they heard voices, and they all froze, pressing themselves against the cold stone. Jon's heart pounded as the voices faded, and they continued on. The sense of confinement weighed on him. He recalled the open spaces of the north, the sky vast above Winterfell. Now the city seemed to press in on him like a living thing, a labyrinth of hatred and sorrow. The tunnel sloped upward, the water receding until they walked on slick stone. A side passage branched off. Yessa paused, tilting her head as if listening. "This way," she finally whispered, choosing the left path. The corridor narrowed until Ghost had to lower his head to fit. Rivulets of murky water trickled along the edges, forming puddles that reflected the torch's flicker. Eventually, they came upon a set of crumbling steps leading to a rusted iron gate. The gate was ajar, its hinges squealing when Sir Davos tested it. Beyond lay a chamber with a vaulted ceiling. Torchlight danced across greenish, dripping walls. Cracks in the ceiling hinted at the structures above. If Yessa's sense of direction was correct, they were near the cellars that extended beneath the Red Keep. Jon felt his pulse quicken. If they emerged close to the keep's basement levels, they might slip into the castle. But would Lannister guards be waiting? They stepped into the chamber. The air was marginally less foul, but a sense of unease clung to every surface. The flicker of the torch revealed old barrels stacked along one wall, some shattered from age. A rustling in the shadows made them jump, but it was only a rat that darted away with a squeak. Ghost sniffed the air, then growled softly. His hackles rose, muzzle pointing toward a darkened arch on the far side. Jon lifted Longclaw. "Stay alert," he whispered, heart thudding. They inched forward, listening. Faint scuffling sounds echoed from the darkness beyond the arch. A corridor led deeper, presumably closer to the keep's sublevels. The tension in the air was suffocating. Jon carefully set one foot after another, mindful not to splash or kick loose stones. Every nerve bristled. Without warning, a shape materialized in the corridor, the faint glimmer of steel catching the torchlight. A man wearing plain leather armor raised a crossbow. He looked more surprised than they did. Jon reacted instinctively, jerking aside as the bolt hissed past him, embedding in the stone with a shower of sparks. Ghost lunged, but the corridor was narrow, forcing him back. Davos threw the torch to the ground, freeing his sword arm. The corridor flared with jostling shadows, half illuminated by the fallen torch. "Drop your weapon," Jon hissed, stepping forward, blade at the ready. The man cursed and tried to reload. One of Jon's Northmen launched himself forward, grappling the crossbow. They slammed into the damp wall, grunting as they struggled. Another figure emerged from the darkness behind the first man, brandishing a short sword. Yessa cried out, ducking behind a barrel. Sir Davos parried the newcomer's blow, steel clanging. Sparks lit the gloom. Jon lunged at the man with the short sword, sweeping Longclaw downward. The man twisted aside, his blade scraping along Jon's. A swirl of torchlight revealed a pale, desperate face. A smuggler or cutthroat, perhaps. Not a Lannister soldier in shining mail. This corridor was evidently claimed by criminals taking advantage of the chaos above. The man spat at Jon, trying to feint. Jon beat his sword aside and kicked him in the chest, sending him reeling. Before he could recover, Ghost darted in, jaws clamping down on his forearm. The man shrieked, dropping the weapon. Another savage shake from the direwolf sent him crumpling to the floor. Meanwhile, the Northman who had grappled the crossbow wielder managed to wrench the weapon free and club him across the temple with its wooden stock. The smuggler slumped. Davos pressed his sword to the second man's throat, pinning him. The man coughed, eyes wide with pain, staring at Ghost's crimson muzzle. "We don't want to kill you," Jon said, his voice echoing off the walls. He was breathing fast. "We only want to pass through." The pinned man whimpered, blood streaming from his mangled arm. "Let us go," he gasped, terror shining in his eyes. "We'll leave. We was just hiding from the fighting above. Didn't know who you were." "There." John nodded at Davos, who eased his sword back an inch. The other smuggler groaned, coming around from the blow to his head. He clutched at the crossbow lying useless nearby. John kicked it away. "How many of you are there?" he demanded. "Just us two," the man stammered. "We swear it." John believed him, or at least saw no sign of more men lurking. He gestured to the Northmen holding the crossbow. "Take their weapons, lock them in that side chamber." He pointed to a small niche, likely once a storeroom. The door was old, but with enough debris piled against it, they could keep them contained without killing them outright. They dragged the wounded smugglers over, ignoring their panicked pleas. "We won't alert no one," one sobbed. But there was no room for trust, not here. Yessa and the Northmen sealed the door with a half-broken barrel and some fallen stones. Davos snatched up the torch again, though it guttered, nearly spent. Silence returned, tense and fragile. John exhaled. His hands were trembling with adrenaline. This entire city was a pit of violence and desperation. "Let's keep moving," he said, voice rough. They pressed onward, leaving the chamber behind. The corridor narrowed once more, the walls closing in like a mausoleum. Ghost's presence at John's side comforted him slightly. After another stretch of winding tunnel, they came upon a heavy iron-bound door set into the stone. Rust coated its hinges, and a large ring handle hung askew. Yessa tested it, her face set in concentration. She grunted. "Locked. Might be from the other side." "Stand aside," one of the Northmen said, raising a stout crowbar he had taken from the smugglers. He wedged it between the door and frame. With a creaking protest, the old wood began to splinter. John and Sir Davos added their weight, bracing their shoulders against the door. After a few heartbeats of effort, it gave way with a resounding crack. Swinging inward, dust billowed out, stinging their eyes. They entered cautiously, swords up. The room beyond was large, with a row of stone pillars supporting the ceiling. Piles of discarded crates and broken furniture littered the corners. A faint shaft of light fell from above through a small grate, casting a mottled patch of brightness on the floor. The air here was cool and stale, but far less foul than in the sewers. John lifted the flickering torch, scanning the perimeter. This must be an abandoned sub-basement or a storeroom connected to the keep. He could sense they were close. The faint rumble of distant footsteps or movement echoed from above. If they went upward, they might emerge in the dungeons or service corridors that were part of the castle's infrastructure. Sir Davos spoke softly. "We should douse the torch soon. If we're near the keep, guards might see the light through the grates." "That's our canon." John nodded, carefully extinguishing the torch against the damp stone. Darkness swallowed them, but for the thin beam of daylight from overhead. He let his eyes adjust, hearing Ghost's light panting. Slowly, shapes emerged. Yessa led them past a row of pillars. Near the far wall was a narrow staircase that curved upward, cut from the same stone. They crept toward it, hearts pounding. A distant vibration in the walls told them that the fighting above continued, the city in turmoil. John prayed that the men he had left behind were still alive, that the Tyrell banners had not been put to the torch. All of it rested on the slimmest chance that he could reach Tommen and end the conflict. Otherwise, King's Landing might burn before nightfall. The steps led them to a heavy wooden door that appeared more functional than the last, with iron bands that looked better maintained. John pressed an ear to it, hearing muffled echoes, possibly voices in a corridor. He glanced at the others, who stood ready behind him, weapons in hand. Slowly, he tried the handle. Locked. Dashi. John pulled a small, narrow knife from his belt and slipped it into the latch mechanism, hoping to manipulate the bolt. Time seemed to stretch painfully as he worked. He felt the bolt shift a fraction, but it would not turn fully. One of the Northmen cursed under his breath. They could try brute force again, but that would alert anyone on the other side. Sir Davos carefully nudged John aside and pulled out a small set of strange implements. He bent to examine the lock, his forehead creasing. "Let's see if my old skills haven't left me," he whispered. In the faint light, he coaxed the tumblers. Jon could almost hear his own heartbeat, loud as a drum, while they waited. At last there was a soft click. Davos gently pushed on the door and it swung open a crack, revealing a sliver of lamplit corridor. Ghost sniffed the gap warily, silent as a shadow. Jon inched forward, peering out. The corridor was narrow but well lit by wall sconces, the floor of polished stone. A flicker of torchlight revealed that no immediate guards were visible. They slipped through, one by one, crouched low, shutting the door behind them. The corridor stretched to the left and right. The left side ended in a stairwell climbing upward, while the right bent out of sight. Jon looked at Yessa, but she could only shrug. She'd never been inside this part of the keep. He tried to recall what little he knew of the Red Keep's layout. He'd been in the throne room, but never its labyrinth of halls below. He gestured to the left. Stairs up might lead toward the main floors. That's where Tommen likely is. They moved quietly, footsteps muffled on the stone. At the foot of the stairs, they paused. Voices echoed above. Two men, perhaps more, talking in hushed tones. Jon exchanged a look with Sir Davos and pressed himself against the wall, straining to hear. "My watch ends soon. I just hope they've not started flinging wildfire out there," one guard was saying, his voice tense. "Queen Regent's orders can be unpredictable." Another guard let out a harsh breath. Well, be thankful we're not out on the walls. They say Tyrell forces have battered down the Lion Gate. Fighting might spill into the outer ward any moment." Jon felt a grim pang. So the Tyrells had managed to get inside the city proper, perhaps taking the Lion Gate. That would place them dangerously close to the keep. If the Lannisters made good on their threat to use wildfire, the entire area could go up in green flames. He clenched his teeth, gesturing for the others to be ready. Up the stairs, the voices continued. "I just want to see this done. Don't fancy dying for that boy king. The queen's the real power and she's half a step from madness." His companion hissed. "Quiet. Walls have ears. We do what we're told. The king might be the realm's hope for all we know. After all, his mother can't rule forever." A short silence followed. Jon wondered if they were about to move on. Then came footsteps descending the stairs. He tightened his grip on Longclaw. Heart pounding. The corridor had little cover, so they would have to make a choice, attack or risk being seen. Sir Davos nodded at him, face grim. Jon let out a slow, silent breath, lowering into a defensive stance. Ghost crouched, muscles coiled. A single Lannister guard appeared first, mail clinking. He held a spear loosely, helmet tucked under his arm, walking with the air of a man who thought himself safe. A second guard followed, a younger man with tired eyes. The pair descended the staircase, talking softly, until they reached the bottom, and then froze, eyes going wide at the sight of Jon's group. For half a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the first guard opened his mouth to shout an alarm. Davos lunged in, muffling the man's cry by clamping a hand over his mouth, while the second guard stumbled back in horror. Jon rushed forward, pressing his blade to the younger guard's throat. Ghost bristled, growling, ready to spring. Jon spoke in a hushed, urgent tone. "Don't make a sound or you'll die." He could see the guard's terror. Slowly, the man lowered his spear. His companion also went still, pinned by Davos. "We mean you no harm if you cooperate," Jon continued, aware that the corridor's acoustics might carry their voices upward. "I want to speak with King Tommen. That's all." The older guard gave a muffled grunt. Davos eased his grip a fraction so the man could speak. "You're mad," he hissed. "The Red Keep is locked down. You'll never get near the king." Jon's voice was tight. "We'll see about that. Where is he kept?" "The throne room. His chambers." A flicker of confusion crossed the guard's face. "Hiss. Mother keeps him in Maegor's holdfast, with the king's guard. You'll never." Davos tightened his hold again, cutting off the man's words. Jon shifted his gaze to the younger guard. "Listen to me carefully. If we don't reach the king, Cersei Lannister might burn this entire city. The Tyrells are at the gates and thousands will die. Help us, and we can end this. You spoke of not wanting to die for the boy king." The younger guard swallowed hard, glancing at his comrade, then back at Jon. He looked at the direwolf baring its teeth. Finally, he spoke, voice trembling. "Maegrs, hold fast. The Queen Regent has him guarded day and night. They've blocked all access but the drawbridge. You'll never cross it without the royal passphrase." "How do we find it?" Jon demanded, though he already suspected this guard wouldn't know. As expected, the young man shook his head helplessly. "I don't know. The King's Guard might. Or the Queen herself." Jon's mind raced. So the boy king was essentially a prisoner of his mother, locked away in a fortress within the fortress. Even if they reached the courtyard, there was a moat and drawbridge around Maegrs Holdfast. Storming it with 5 men was laughable. They needed cunning. Or they needed to sow enough chaos within the keep that they could slip across somehow. But that risked Tommen's life if the defenders panicked. He looked at Davos, seeing the same grim realization in his eyes. "We can't turn back," Jon whispered. "We'll push on. The gods will it or they won't." Sir Davos gave a solemn nod. Yessa hovered behind them, clearly unsettled by the mention of additional fortifications. Their small group would be no match for a fully alert garrison, but as far as Jon was concerned, they had no other choice. He faced the young guard again. "What's your name?" "Walder," he whispered, eyes flicking from Jon's face to Ghost's bared teeth. "Walder, will you help us get closer?" The guard swallowed. His companion shook his head violently, but Walder hesitated. Fear and uncertainty waged a visible battle behind his eyes. At last he nodded, albeit shakily. I can take you partway. Past the scullery corridors, maybe. But if the others see me leading armed strangers, they'll kill me on the spot." Jon relaxed his grip, stepping back. "We'll do everything we can to protect you." He turned to the older guard who glared at him. "We can't let you raise the alarm," Jon said evenly. "Tie him up. Gag him." "No," the older guard spat. But he had no leverage. The Northman stripped his weapon and used a length of rope to bind his hands and feet. Then they pulled him into a small alcove, hidden by a dusty tapestry, ignoring his muffled protests. With that done, Jon turned to Walder. "Lead on." Quietly. The guard gave a miserable nod. The climb up the staircase felt like walking into a lion's den. Each step threatened to reveal a patrol or a retainer. Walder guided them into a narrow back passage behind the keep's main corridors, used by servants. The walls were plain, the floors less polished, a domain of scullions and kitchen staff. Occasionally, they heard distant voices or footsteps beyond a door. Each time, Walder signaled for them to halt until the danger passed. At length, they reached a small landing that opened onto a corridor faintly illuminated by tall windows. Through one window, Jon glimpsed a portion of the Red Keep's inner courtyard. A swirl of smoke lingered overhead, and the frantic clang of bells echoed from some distant tower. Soldiers rushed across the courtyard in Lannister livery, evidently preparing defenses. A portcullis stood lowered, and behind it Jon saw the silhouette of Maegrs Holdfast. A squat fortress within the castle walls, separated by a deep, dry moat. Walder licked his lips nervously. That's where the king is. But the drawbridge is up. The gatehouse is guarded by at least a dozen men, day and night. Sometimes the queen passes through, but there's no way across unseen. Jon studied the courtyard. Even if he had 100 men, crossing that open space would be near impossible without being riddled by arrows. And with the drawbridge up, they couldn't even approach the holdfast. He felt the weight of despair settling in his chest. At the same time, the crash of distant battle hammered at his senses. Time was running out. If he couldn't reach Tommen soon, the city would tear itself apart. Sir Davos leaned in, speaking softly. "We could create a distraction, or wait until the queen crosses. But we don't know when that might be." Jon nodded, in silent agreement. He was about to speak, when Ghost, crouched at his side, let out a low growl. Walder stiffened. From the corridor behind them came faint voices, drawing closer. Boot steps echoed on the stone. Jon motioned for them to move, and they slipped into an alcove near the window, pressing themselves against the wall, hidden by a heavy hanging. Ghost stayed silent, though his body was tensed like a spring. The footsteps approached, and Jon could make out fragments of a conversation. The Tyrells have seized the Outer Bailey. We can't hold them back much longer. Queen must give the order. Another voice, lower, replied, "She will, if the boy doesn't sign the decree. She's threatened to burn them out. It's only a matter of time." Jon's heart pounded. The Lannisters were indeed prepared to turn King's Landing into a funeral pyre. If Tommen refused to authorize it, Cersei might do it on her own. Either way, the city was on the brink. He clenched his fists, feeling the rough fabric of the tapestry brush his cheeks. The voices faded, the footsteps receding. Walder exhaled shakily. Jon eased away from the wall, every instinct screaming at him that time was short. If Cersei was that close to unleashing wildfire or some other horror, they had only moments to act. He peered again through the window at Maegor's holdfast. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky a pallid orange beyond the haze of smoke. Soldiers scurried like ants, some bearing crates and barrels that could very well be wildfire casks. Jon whispered, "We may have to do something drastic. If we can't cross the moat, we might try climbing over the battlements or sneaking in through the basement levels again. Is there a postern door into the holdfast from below?" Walder shook his head. "Not that I know of. Maegor's was built to be impenetrable. The Queen only uses the drawbridge, or the main gate." He swallowed, eyes flicking to the window. "Sometimes the castle staff brings food across that bridge, but the guards search every crate." Sir Davos let out a frustrated breath. "That won't help. Unless we find a way to hide ourselves among the supplies. But even then, we'd need them to lower the bridge." "Nams." Yessa muttered. "And if they search the crates, it's finished." Another silence fell. The group looked to Jon, who stared at the fortress in thought. An idea surfaced, desperate, but maybe possible. What if we signal the Tyrells to press an assault on the Red Keep's outer gate right as we approach the drawbridge? The Lannisters would be distracted, forced to defend the walls. They might open the holdfast to move troops or to bring the king to safety. "Bait them out," Sir Davos murmured. "Risky. Could lead to heavy losses." "New?" Jon nodded, bleakness creeping into his voice. "I know, but if we do nothing, the city burns. If the Tyrells can threaten the gates at the right moment, the Lannisters might rush Tommen or the Queen across that drawbridge, or send out men. In the confusion, we slip in. Once I have Tommen, I can force him to order the Gold Cloaks to stand down. The Lannisters can't disobey a direct royal command without committing open treason." It was a gamble. Then again, everything about this day had been a gamble. They were knee-deep in blood and subterfuge. Sir Davos weighed the plan, finally nodding. "We'll need to get a message to the Tyrells at the Outer Bailey. If we can reach them, coordinate the timing, we might have a chance." Jon looked at Walder, who seemed torn between fear and the faint hope that this might end. "Take us to a vantage point closer to the yard. We'll see if we can slip out and find whomever leads the Tyrell push." Walder agreed with a silent nod. The group prepared to move again, ghosting through the Red Keep's servant corridors, hearts drumming with each step. The notion of sneaking in and out among the defenders of the castle was sheer folly, but they had come too far to turn back. The city was out of time. Whatever happened next, Jon told himself, he must not let Tommen die. The boy was a decent soul, overshadowed by his mother's ruthless cunning. If Tommen was killed or used as a martyr, the Lannisters would cling to power, or the realm would collapse further into chaos. No, the only path forward was to reach the king, whatever it took. He silently prayed to both the old gods and the new that he wasn't already too late. They ascended a final stair, the corridor brightening. War raged outside, but for the moment an uncanny calm wrapped these hidden passageways. Jon could feel the weight of a throne pressing on his shoulders, the seat he never wanted, yet was poised to claim. With each breath, he forced away the fear of failure. If he failed now, not only would King's Landing burn, but so might all of Westeros when the long night came. There was no turning back. He put a hand on Ghost's head, feeling the direwolf's reassuring presence. The hidden door ahead of them led to an uncertain battlefield. He braced himself, casting one last glance at the men and woman with him. Sir Davos gave a nod. Yessa looked determined, clutching her dagger. Walder swallowed his terror. The other Northman tightened his grip on his sword. Jon exhaled, heart thundering. Then, with steady resolve, he pushed the door open. The battle for the Iron Throne, and for the fate of all the living, hung on the blade's edge. And with it, Jon Snow stepped into the light, prepared to face whatever waited beyond. Jon stepped through the small door and emerged into a corridor of pale stone washed by the late afternoon sun. The light slanted through tall, narrow windows, illuminating swirling dust motes in the air. Heat pressed against him, for the hall was stifling, and the windows were set high on the wall, meant to keep the inhabitants secure rather than comfortable. Ghost slipped in at his side, silent as a shadow, his pink tongue lolling. Davos, Yessa, Walder, and the remaining Northmen fanned out behind Jon, their boots echoing on the polished floor. Every nerve in Jon's body remained taut, ready for the next ambush. Far off, the booming thunder of distant battle reminded them that King's Landing was still tearing itself apart. Walder led them swiftly, casting fearful glances over his shoulder. He was a slight young man with anxious eyes, and the threat of Lannister retribution weighed on him. Yet, something in his face suggested a flicker of hope. Perhaps the idea that, should Jon succeed, there might be an end to this bloodshed. They passed a series of carved doors and small arches, presumably leading to storerooms or lesser halls within the Red Keep. Echoes of shouts drifted from somewhere above, but the halls here were curiously empty. They paused at a corner, pressed against cold stone. Walder gestured for silence, then peered around. He turned back with a curt whisper. Guards, posted by the stair to the outer bailey. They looked tense, pikes and crossbows. Jon nodded. We need to slip past or find another route. We can't take on a full squad in these close quarters. Sir Davos studied the corridor, noting a decorative frieze running along the upper wall. It depicted dragons coiling among swords, chipped paint revealing the stone beneath. His voice dropped low. Any chance there's a servant's staircase or a side door we can use? Something that bypasses the main guard posts? Walder shook his head with genuine regret. Not that I know of. These halls were refitted after King Joffrey took power. Many of the old passages were blocked or sealed with iron gates. I'm sorry. Bebemnan. Yessa, who had lived in the city's underbelly for years, pressed her lips into a thin line. We might be forced to fight our way through. Jon exhaled, measuring the risk. If they revealed themselves in a full-on assault, the alarm would ripple through the keep. Every guard in earshot would come running, making it impossible to reach the courtyard. Then again, time was slipping through their fingers. He leaned to peer around the corner. 2 crossbowmen stood braced near a wide archway, scanning for threats. Farther back, a trio of pikemen lounged by a side table. One leaned forward, muttering something about the Tyrell push. Though they looked weary, their weapons were close at hand. Jon considered it. We could draw them away, create noise somewhere else. If even half of them leave to investigate, we might slip through. How? Davos asked. We'd have to make enough of a ruckus to pull them off their post, but not so much that the entire castle descends on us. Jon's thoughts spun. He remembered the corridor behind them, the many doors they'd passed. If we break something, start a small fire perhaps, it might lure them away. Yessa hesitated. A fire. The Red Keep is mostly stone, but some of these rooms are filled with wood furnishings, and if it spreads, the city's tinder dry already. Jon grimaced. I know, but we need a distraction. If we're careful to keep it contained, we might avoid a catastrophe. Davos pressed a hand against the cool stone floor. We're on a lower level here. The chance of a fire jumping too far isn't high, especially if we douse it quickly. But the guards would certainly investigate smoke. None of them liked the idea, but the alternatives were worse. Walder shrugged, looking torn. It could work. Just be sure we're not boxed in by any flames we start. Nene. They retreated to a small side door they'd passed moments before. Behind it lay a cramped storage chamber. Within, they found old benches stacked against the walls, a broken desk, and a mound of dusty rags that might have once been banners. Ghost sniffed around, sneezing as he raised a cloud of dust. Jon pulled some rags free, shaping them into a pile near the far corner. Davos found a half-empty jug of lamp oil resting on a shelf. Yessa scoured a few spiderwebbed crates for anything flammable. Splintered wood scraps, bits of straw. The second Northman, a broad-shouldered fellow named Harold, stood guard at the door. "All right," Jon said softly, once they'd gathered a decent heap of tinder. "We set it ablaze. Make sure the smoke billows into the corridor. Then we hurry back and wait for the guards to rush over. When they do, we slip by." Davos nodded, face tense. "We'd best be quick." Jon took a trembling breath and nodded for Davos to pour the oil. The reek of it made him turn his head. They spread the oil sparingly, just enough to ensure a bright flame. Jon struck flint against steel, sending sparks into the rag pile. A tiny ember glowed, then caught. Fire crackled greedily, leaping along the stained cloth. Heat and smoke rose at once, curling black lines up the stone walls. Ghost edged back, ears pinned. Already, the temperature in the small room soared. They crept out, leaving the door ajar so the smoke could billow into the hall. Harold shoved a cask of old linens in the way, creating more fodder for the flames. Within moments, the corridor began to fill with the acrid smell. Jon beckoned everyone around another bend, pressing themselves to the walls. If all went to plan, the guards by the archway would catch wind of the smoke and come investigating. Only a minute passed before they heard shouts. "Smoke! Check it out!" The clatter of armor signaled movement. Jon dared to look around the corner. The crossbowmen were already heading down the hall, followed by one of the pikemen. Two remained behind, uncertain. One was barking orders. "You! Get a bucket chain. We can't have a fire here. Move!" Jon waited, heart hammering. A swirl of alarmed voices echoed. Another guard hurried away. Now only one man stood at the archway, pike gripped tight, shifting anxiously on his feet. Not ideal, but better than 5. He seemed torn between holding his post and joining the others. More smoke belched from the side corridor. The man coughed, glancing back with alarm. Then he took 2 steps forward, clearly torn. Another shout echoed from the direction of the fire, and at last the guard cursed and turned, jogging off to help. Jon zeiced the moment. He motioned to the others. They slid around the corner, staying low, and glided through the archway into a large hallway that branched off to the outer bailey. The corridor was empty now. Everyone had rushed to the flames. A wave of relief and urgency collided in Jon's chest. They had to move fast, for the guards might return any second. They continued, guided by Walder, who pointed to an arched opening at the far end. Through that arch, they spotted daylight. If they could pass there, they'd be one step closer to the courtyard that led to Maegor's holdfast, and to the Tyrell forces that might be pushing into the outer wards. The tang of smoke still hung in the air. Shouts behind them told of frantic attempts to douse the fire. Jon wondered briefly if they'd set too big a blaze. He whispered a hurried prayer to the gods that they wouldn't burn the entire keep. Reaching the arch, they found a flight of broad steps leading downward to a half-open portcullis. Beyond lay a wide courtyard, ringed by a colonnade. The center was paved with large flagstones. The remnants of a fountain stood at one side, its basin cracked and dry. Jon raised a hand, indicating caution, then inched forward. The courtyard was deserted at first glance. He smelled smoke from the city, heard the clang of swords from the outer walls, but saw no immediate threat. Creeping down the steps, they pressed themselves against the cool stone columns. From this vantage, Jon could glimpse part of the Red Keep's perimeter. He saw a tall gatehouse to the left. Smoke curled above the battlements, where Lannister archers fired outward, presumably at the Tyrell assault. The ground was littered with debris, broken crates, a smashed siege ladder, and a scattering of arrow shafts. The entire fortress seemed to be under siege, but the defenders were holding for now. Jon's gaze traveled across the courtyard to a massive drawbridge flanked by 2 thick towers. Maegor's holdfast. The bridge had been raised. The moat below it looked shallow, but was laced with cruel iron spikes. On the far side, the holdfastest portcullis was lowered. Jon clenched his jaw. Reaching Tommen inside that fortress felt more impossible than ever, but somewhere out there, the Tyrell host battered at the walls, trying to force the Lannisters' hand. If they could coordinate a push at the right moment. Davos eased up beside him. "Look," he murmured, pointing. Along the ramparts of the holdfast, Jon spotted movement. A handful of gold-cloaked soldiers, and among them, a figure in white armor. One of the Kingsguard. The man paced back and forth near the gate controls. Jon's stomach tightened. The Kingsguard were notoriously loyal, no matter how questionable their monarch. If they suspected an infiltration, they'd fill the courtyard with crossbow bolts in seconds. Yessa peered around a column. "There's the main gatehouse for the keep," she whispered, gesturing to their left. "If we can get a message through to the Tyrells waiting on the other side, we might time something." Jon nodded. The plan forming in his mind was fraught with risk. Slip out into the outer bailey, find the Tyrell commander, arrange a coordinated assault on the main gate. The Lannisters defending the keep might be forced to move troops, possibly lower the drawbridge to bring Tommen to safety, or shift him deeper inside. In that confusion, Jon's group could slip across. It was desperate, but in war, desperation often became the only path. Walder's voice broke the momentary silence. "The main gatehouse is dangerous. Lannister men have archers stationed on those walls. If the Tyrells are pushing from outside, that's where the fiercest fighting will be." "That's time." Jon locked eyes with Davos, then gestured for the others to follow him along the colonnade's edge, keeping behind pillars for cover. The courtyard was eerily quiet, the stillness broken only by the distant cacophony from the city walls. Now and then, a random arrow soared overhead and clattered against the stone. Ghost's claws clicked lightly on the paving stones, but the direwolf made no sound of distress. Jon took that as a sign that no immediate foe lurked around the next corner. They navigated a low set of stairs leading to a wide corridor that angled toward the outer gates. Several battered doorways branched off. Some collapsed from earlier fighting. Bits of shattered wood and twisted iron littered the floor. Bloodstains streaked the walls, and one corner reeked of old smoke. It was clear that some skirmish had taken place here earlier in the day. Davos paused to check for signs of life, but found only silence. As they moved on, the corridor's end came into view, a tall double door slightly ajar. Through the gap, Jon glimpsed broad daylight and the flicker of movement, shadows shifting in what appeared to be a postern courtyard near the outer curtain wall. Walder signaled them to stop, swallowing his anxiety. "On the other side of this courtyard, you can reach the main gates. There's a walkway along the ramparts too, but the Lannisters might have posted men." Jon pressed his back to the cold stone, breathing evenly. "We'll see if the Tyrells are close enough to help. Once we cross that threshold, we'll be exposed." He glanced at his small band: Davos, Yessa, Walder, and Harold. None of them flinched, though he could sense how each weighed the risk. "Let's go." They eased the door open. Light flooded the corridor, making Jon squint. The small courtyard beyond was enclosed by high walls. Along these walls rose a wooden scaffolding, perhaps used by builders to repair the keep's defenses. 2 Lannister guards stood at the far end, scanning the top of the wall. They wore battered helmets, their red cloaks streaked with dust. Both seemed on edge, crossbows in hand, as if expecting an attack from above. From somewhere beyond the wall came the unmistakable crash of a ram or a heavy siege device. Jon heard war horns, faint but urgent. No one else was in immediate sight. Ghost gave a low growl, but Jon patted the wolf's head, trying to keep him calm. The group huddled behind a pile of debris, watching the guards. Walder licked his lips, as if mustering courage. Davos' knuckles whitened around his sword hilt. They had to either dispatch these guards quickly or find another way around. Every heartbeat felt like a drumbeat echoing in Jon's ears. They could attempt a stealth approach, but crossbows at close range could be lethal. If the guards raised an alarm, more would come. Jon's gaze flicked to the scaffolding overhead. It connected to a walkway near the parapet. If someone climbed up quietly, they might drop down behind the guards or distract them from above. Jon glanced at Harold. a man with a sturdy build who had once scaled the walls of Winterfell in a training exercise. Harold caught Jon's meaning. He nodded, passing his sword to Davos so he could climb unencumbered. Crouching low, Harold crept to the scaffolding's base and began to ascend, foot by careful foot, testing each plank for creaks. One of the guards glanced in that direction, but the scaffolding was partially hidden by a collapsed chunk of masonry, and apparently he noticed nothing amiss. Walder tensed, eyes wide. Yessa clutched her dagger, lips pressed thin. Harold reached the top, gripping the parapet's edge. The guards remained unaware, focused on scanning the skies for Tyrell archers. In a swift motion, Harold swung himself onto a narrow ledge above them. Jon gave a slight wave of his hand, urging him on. Harold shifted his weight, loosened a spare dagger from his belt, and prepared to drop. He leapt. The impact of his landing was audible, even from across the courtyard. One guard staggered forward, nearly toppling, as Harold drove the dagger into the back of his neck. The second guard spun, crossbow swinging around. Jon's instincts took over. He burst from behind the rubble, sprinting across the courtyard before the guard could fire. Ghost bounded beside him, a white streak of fury. The guard loosed his bolt in panic. It skittered off the paving stones, missing Harold's thigh by inches. Then Ghost was on him, jaws clamping around the man's forearm. He screamed, dropping his weapon. Harold wrested the crossbow free, and in moments the guard collapsed, pinned beneath Ghost's weight, blood seeping through his mail. Davos and Yessa hurried across, checking for more threats, but no other Lannister soldiers appeared. The horns beyond the wall blared again, more insistent this time. Jon knelt by the wounded guard, who was moaning. Ghost still had the man's arm in a vise-like grip. The guard's helmet had fallen off, revealing a face etched with pain and raw terror. Jon's voice was low, urgent. "Don't shout, it'll do you no good." The guard's breath came in ragged gasps. He tried to nod. Ghost released him, teeth dripping with blood. Jon slid the man's pike away. "How many men defend the gatehouse?" The guard groaned, pressing a hand to his bleeding arm. "Enough to kill you all," he rasped, defiant. But there was an edge of fear in his eyes that belied the bravado. Davos stepped forward, sword angled at the guard's throat. "We're not playing games. The city is on the verge of burning. If your queen unleashes wildfire, your life means as little as ours." The guard stared at him, confusion and dread mingling. Jon remembered all of the times he'd been forced to question men who were simply following orders. This was not the path he chose, but it was the path forced upon him. He leaned closer, voice grim. "Where's your commander? Are reinforcements coming?" The man glanced at the battered gatehouse behind them. "Commander's up on the ramparts. Maybe a score of archers. Some footmen in the yard. The Tyrells keep ramming the outer gate." He grimaced, a flash of agony twisting his features. "They'll break through soon." Jon nodded. "So it won't be long before fighting pours into this courtyard. If you want to survive, stay quiet. Tend your wound. We won't kill you." Harold, pale with adrenaline, glanced at Jon for confirmation. Jon gave a curt nod, then turned away, leaving the guard in the dust. They didn't have time to bind him up or drag him along as a prisoner. The guard's comrade lay face down in a widening puddle of blood. Jon kept his gaze averted, swallowing the sick feeling in his gut. War had turned him into the judge of who lived and died in these narrow corridors. They advanced toward the gatehouse. The yard beyond was ringed by a high wall with murder holes overhead. The gate itself stood closed. Jon heard the echo of a battering ram striking the outer side. Each impact resonated through the stone, accompanied by faint cheers or shouts from the Tyrell side. If that gate gave way, Tyrell soldiers would flood in, possibly overwhelming the Lannisters stationed here. The swirl of possibilities made Jon's pulse race. Davos pointed out a small staircase leading to the ramparts. "We can climb up, see where the Tyrell commander is. Maybe hail them from the wall." Jon considered the risk. Once on the ramparts, they'd be fully exposed. But it was better than waiting in the yard for an all-out melee to erupt. "Let's go," he said quietly. They ascended the stone steps two at a time, staying close to the inner side of the battlements. From higher up, the city stretched out in a jagged sprawl of red rooftops and rising plumes of smoke. It made Jon's heart wrench. This was the heart of the Seven Kingdoms, the seat of power for generations, now turned into a war-scarred ruin. At the crest of the steps, they peered over the parapet. Sure enough, a large force of Tyrell soldiers massed beyond the gate. Banners of green and gold rippled above a line of siege towers. They had constructed a sturdy ram that slammed into the gates in rhythmic bursts, each strike shaking the stone beneath Jon's feet. Lannister archers on a neighboring tower exchanged volleys with Tyrell bowmen, the sky thick with arrows. As Jon watched, a Tyrell horn blew. Soldiers scrambled forward with tall shields, covering the ram. Two Lannister scorpions pivoted from the top of a tower, launching heavy bolts at the siege lines. Screams rose from below as men fell, transfixed by iron-tipped shafts. Yet the Tyrell ranks pressed on. Jon felt both horror and relief. Horror at the carnage, relief that the Tyrells were still in this fight. If they gave up now, Cersei would turn all her attention to slaughtering the Northmen in her midst. Harold stood behind Jon, glancing around, worried about Lannister guards. Walder hovered near the steps, chewing his lip. "We won't stay hidden up here for long," he warned. Any moment, Lannisters could round the corner. Jon motioned for everyone to crouch below the crenellations. The wind buffeted them, carrying the stench of burning pitch. Ghost pressed close to Jon, as if sensing the tension. "We need to get the Tyrell commander's attention," Jon said. "If they'll look up, maybe we can signal them to hold off or shift the attack when we need them to." Davos peered over the battlement. "They're focused on the gate. And from their perspective, we could be Lannisters. They'd likely shoot first." Jon racked his brain for a way to identify themselves. A white cloth alone might not mean much in the thick of battle. Then he remembered his cloak. The Stark direwolf embroidered at the corner. He quickly unbuckled it, exposing the dark gray sigil upon the faded black. "We wave this, maybe they'll know the North is here." He glanced at the swirling chaos below. The question is whether they'll notice or trust it. Still, it was the only option they had. Jon eased upward, resting one hand on the cold stone of the crenellation. The hiss of arrows soared by, a few passing overhead with a menacing hum. He lifted the cloak high, shaking it out so the wolf's sigil might catch a stray beam of sunlight. His heart thundered. Beneath him, Tyrell soldiers roared as the ram slammed once more into the gate. Wood splintered, and a chunk of the gate sagged inward. The defenders threw down pots of burning oil, sending orange flames licking up the ram's sides. Men scrambled, shrieking as flaming oil splattered across shields. Jon kept waving. An arrow thumped into the wall a mere foot from his elbow, quivering. Davos yanked him back down. "Damn close," the older man hissed. "We'll both be pincushions if we're not careful." But in that brief moment, Jon thought he saw a figure on the Tyrell front line pause and lift a spyglass or a horn. The man seemed to point upward, as if noticing the black cloak with the direwolf. It happened so quickly that Jon wasn't certain, but a knot of Tyrell men clustered near the ram, looking up at the battlements. An arrow from the Lannister tower felled one of them, and the rest scrambled behind a battered palisade. Jon's hope wavered, uncertain if they'd gleaned his meaning. He turned to Davos. "We've got to get closer to them, down to the yard, or even open the gate from inside. If the Tyrells breach, we might rally together. Then we can coordinate the push on Maegor's holdfast." Davos made a face. "Trying to open the gate from the inside is a fine way to get ourselves killed, lad. But if the Tyrells see the gates parting, they'll surge in. The Lannisters will do everything in their power to stop us." Jon's jaw tensed. "It's a risk we'll have to take. Unless there's a smaller sally port or side entrance we can operate." "Walder?" Walder shook his head, wincing. "Most of those smaller doors were sealed when the siege began. The main gates are the only feasible entry for an army." Jon nodded grimly. "Then that's our path. If we can wrest control of the gatehouse from the Lannisters inside, we can crank open the portcullis and let the Tyrells flood in. Once inside, we coordinate the final push on the holdfast. If we fail, we die here." "Down the way then." No one contradicted him. Ghost let out a soft growl, as if sensing the next wave of danger. Harold hefted the crossbow he'd taken from the guard, checking the mechanism. Yessa slid her dagger into its sheath, picking up a short sword from one of the fallen soldiers. Davos exhaled, steeling himself. Walder stared, swallowing hard but gave a nod. They slunk along the ramparts, hugging the shadows beneath the merlons, stepping around scattered arrows. At the far end a squat stone tower rose, the gatehouse tower presumably. Jon could make out at least half a dozen guards on the top walkway, leaning over to shout down orders or reload crossbows. Smoke from the burning ram drifted upward, obscuring them. Every so often a Lannister soldier coughed or rubbed his eyes. Jon saw an opportunity. The smoke might give them partial cover if they moved in stealth. They paused just shy of the final approach to the tower. A stone platform jutted out, ringed by a low parapet. Beneath it lay the central mechanism for the portcullis, the massive chains, gears, and counterweights. Usually, it required several men to haul them open. Jon heard frantic voices as Lannister soldiers argued about how best to repel the ram. "We'll burn them all," one snarled. "We just need more oil." Another spat back. "We're nearly out, you fool. The Queen demands we hold, but we can't conjure oil from thin air." Jon motioned for the others to fan out. If they rushed the platform, they'd have the element of surprise. But the Lannisters had the advantage of numbers. A single well-placed crossbow bolt could end it all. The smoke and confusion were on Jon's side, but he'd need to strike fast. They crept along the last stretch, pressed tight to the stone. Ghost crouched at Jon's heels, tension rippling through his thick fur. Davos moved to the left, indicating he'd circle behind a cluster of barrels. Walder clung to the wall, eyes scanning for an opening. Harold carefully loaded the crossbow, trying to keep quiet. Jon inhaled, counting heartbeats as he listened to the Lannisters bicker. A sudden horn blast from below signaled another ram strike. The gate groaned. The Lannisters on the platform lurched to attention. Jon sensed their fear and desperation. If the gate gave way, the Tyrells would swarm in. That fear made them more dangerous. They'd fight like cornered wolves. He steeled himself, resting a hand on Ghost's shoulder. Then, with a swift gesture, Jon dashed onto the platform. In the haze of smoke, the first Lannister soldier barely saw him coming. Jon slammed Longclaw into the man's side. The soldier gasped, staggering backward as blood darkened his tunic. Another turned, eyes wide. Before he could shout, a crossbow bolt whizzed by from Harold's vantage, striking him squarely in the chest. The man collapsed against a barrel, sending it rolling across the flagstones. Chaos erupted. The Lannisters who remained on the platform scrambled for weapons, shouting. Someone threw a spear that clattered off the stone near Yessa. Ghost lunged at a guard, fumbling for his sword, jaws closing on the man's forearm with a sickening crunch. Davos vaulted over a crate, parrying a desperate thrust. Sparks flew. The guard nearly knocked Davos off balance, but Walder lunged in from behind, burying a short blade into the guard's neck. A big man in battered plate loomed into Jon's path, brandishing a halberd. His eyes burned with the fury of a man who'd seen too many battles. Jon ducked the wide swing, feeling the rush of air. He dropped to a knee, pivoted, and swept Longclaw in a low arc. The blade bit into the man's calf. He roared, staggering. Jon rose, hammered the pommel against the soldier's helm, and the man toppled with a groan. Across the platform, Davos and Harold fought side by side, slashing at two Lannisters who pressed them with swords. Harold's crossbow was spent, so he used it as a club, swinging at a soldier's head. Davos battered aside another blow. For a moment, Jon caught the older man's eye. Davos' face was drawn but resolute. Then Jon had to spin away as another Lannister soldier came at him. The exchange of steel on steel echoed over the horns and the thunder of the battering ram. This soldier moved quickly, aiming for Jon's torso. Jon twisted aside, boots skidding on a slick patch of blood, nearly losing his balance. The man lunged again. Jon narrowly deflected the thrust, muscles burning from the intensity of the fight. He glimpsed Ghost circling behind the soldier, but the man swung his blade at the direwolf, keeping him at bay. Ghost snapped, ears laid flat. The soldier turned again to Jon, raising his blade overhead. Jon took a risky step forward, inside the man's guard, and drove his shoulder into him. They grappled, stumbling. The soldier brought an elbow down on Jon's back, knocking the wind from his lungs. Pain flared, but Jon gritted his teeth, using the momentum to jab the edge of Longclaw upward. The steel sank beneath the soldier's breastplate. A choked gasp followed, and the man stiffened, then collapsed to his knees. Jon jerked his blade free, chest heaving. Smoke swirled around them, stinging his eyes. He wiped sweat from his brow, scanning for any more Lannisters. The platform was littered with bodies and broken barrels. Davos was helping Harold to his feet. The Northman had taken a shallow cut to the thigh. Yessa knelt near a moaning soldier, pressing a hand to the hilt of her dagger which was buried in his chest. Walder leaned against a broken crate, panting but otherwise unharmed. Ghost stood over a fallen foe, muzzle stained with blood, his breath ragged. They had won the platform, for the moment. Jon could hear shouting from deeper in the tower. More guards might be on their way. He rushed to the massive lever mechanism used to raise and lower the portcullis. It was a tangle of chains and gears. Davos, help me, Jon called, grabbing one of the levers. He pulled, straining with all his might, but it scarcely budged. Davos stumbled over, wincing from a bruise on his shoulder. Together, they heaved. Slowly, the gears groaned. An inch or two of slack appeared in the chain. Walder joined, then Yessa, each lending their strength. Bit by bit, the counterweights shifted. Metal screeched in protest. Below, the ram smashed into the gates again. Jon felt the vibrations in his bones. The portcullis was jammed from the repeated impacts or from earlier sabotage. Still, they pressed on, sweat coursing down their faces. At last, something gave with a shriek of metal, and the chain lurched another foot. Harold limped over, setting his shoulder to the lever as well. With 5 of them pushing and Ghost barking encouragement, the mechanism rattled. The chain began to feed through the gear, and the great iron gate below shuddered as it tried to lift. Outside, the Tyrell ram struck once more, and the gate's wood buckled. A seam of daylight burst through the splinters. The Lannister defenders howled in dismay. Some tried to brace the gate with beams, but it was too late. Jon let out a strained cry as they put all their weight into the lever. The portcullis started rising inch by inch. Through the viewing slits in the tower, Jon glimpsed the Tyrell banners surging forward. They saw the gate rising too, realized their moment had come. A loud cheer rose from the men in green and gold. The ram recoiled, then crashed forward. The battered gates creaked, partially tearing free of the hinges. Gaps big enough for men to crawl through opened. The Tyrell infantry poured in, swords drawn, forcing aside the last Lannister attempts at blocking the entry. A flood of shouting and steel filled the courtyard. Some Lannister soldiers dropped their weapons and ran, while others fought stubbornly, hoping to push the invaders back. Tyrell knights on horseback galloped through the twisted wreck of the gates, banners streaming behind them. An explosion of violence rippled outward as the defenders and attackers clashed in the yard below. The echo of steel on steel reverberated in Jon's skull. Breathing hard, he realized that letting the Tyrells in was only the first step. Now they had to find the commander before the Tyrell soldiers mistook them for Lannisters. "We need to get down there," he shouted to Davos over the cacophony. "We must hold them back from slaughtering the entire garrison, and coordinate the assault on Maegor's Holdfast." Davos nodded, trying to steady himself on the lever. "Aye. Let's hope they'll recognize the Stark sigil and not put an arrow in our throats." They released the lever. The portcullis was up far enough to allow the Tyrell force entry, though it threatened to slip if no one secured it. No time to fix that now. With Walder and the others following, Jon staggered to the tower stairs leading down into the courtyard. Ghost bounded ahead. The stone steps were sticky with spilled oil, and the smell of char hovered in the smoky air. Bodies lay scattered. One man in a gold cloak twitched, a crossbow bolt lodged in his collarbone. Another wore Tyrell armor, splayed out with a fatal gash across his belly. Jon swallowed down the horror and pressed on. At the base of the tower, the courtyard had become a swirling melee. Tyrell footmen in half-plate advanced, cornering Lannister defenders against the walls. A swirl of green and red cloaks marked the savage line of battle. Here and there the fighting was brutal and confused, men hacking at each other in desperation. Smoke from the city drifted overhead, tinted orange by the lowering sun. The day was sliding into evening, and still the city fought. Jon raised his cloak with the direwolf sigil high. Yessa grabbed a fallen lance and hoisted it so the black cloth could be seen above the heads of the melee. Harold used his crossbow to ward off any soldier who got too close. They wove through the battlefield, calling out in hoarse voices. "We're with the North. We're allies of House Tyrell." A few of the Tyrell men paused, uncertain, swords dripping with blood. One shouted, "The North?" Another pointed at Jon's cloak. Slowly, a path opened. A tall knight with a green plume on his helm strode forward, sword in hand. He had the bearing of an officer, though his breastplate was battered. He barked a question. "Who leads you?" Jon stepped forward, lowering his sword in a gesture of peace. "I'm Jon Snow, King in the North. We've opened the gate from inside. We need to speak to your commander, immediately." The knight's eyes flicked from Jon's face to the bloody direwolf cloak. He lowered his sword a fraction, lips set in a thin line. "You're the one they spoke of. Lady Olenna said we might find northern allies in the city, but we expected more men." His voice was deep and impatient. "We got separated," Jon panted. "But that's not important now. We have to turn our forces toward Maegor's Holdfast. King Tommen is inside, likely under Queen Cersei's control. If we can capture him without slaughter, we can end this." The knight tore his helmet off, revealing a sweat-streaked face and short-cropped hair. He studied Jon's earnest gaze, then glanced at Davos and the others. "I'm Sir Adrian of Highgarden. Lady Olenna is close behind, but she's keeping well away from the thick of battle. Lord Tarley commands the main assault. If you want to coordinate, we should find him. He'll be near the center lines, pressing toward the Red Keep's heart. The Lannisters are falling back, but they'll fight harder near the Holdfast." "Mertuan." "Why?" Jon's pulse quickened at the name Tarley. Randall Tarley was a formidable commander, and Samwell, Tarley's father. Jon recalled how Sam had dreaded his father's wrath. The man was said to be ruthless in war, an unyielding disciplinarian. Yet if Tarley was on the Tyrell side, that made him a crucial ally now. "Take us to him," Jon said. They skirted the edges of the courtyard, avoiding pockets of ongoing combat. Tyrell soldiers battered down the last pockets of Lannister resistance. A few Lannisters threw down their arms, kneeling. Others fought to the death. The screams of the wounded rose in a grim chorus. Sir Adrian led Jon's group through a shattered archway into an inner yard, formerly a training ground. The space was strewn with broken training dummies and bloodied straw-dot wool. More Tyrell banners fluttered among the chaos. Every so often, a Lannister archer loosed an arrow from a higher window, forcing them to duck. Near the center of this yard, a formation of Tyrell pikemen stood in rank, forming a perimeter. Inside that circle, Jon spotted a tall, gaunt man, clad in polished armor, etched with the golden rose. Randall Tarley. His face was stern, eyes glittering with the intensity of a seasoned commander. Several of his bannermen clustered around him, delivering reports in hushed tones. Jon remembered Sam's stories. How his father despised weakness, how he demanded absolute excellence in arms. Now, Tarley's hawk-like gaze swept the yard, assessing each development. Sir Adrian waved a hand. "Lord Tarley, I bring you the Northern King who helped open the gate." Tarley turned sharply, sizing Jon up with a single cold, penetrating look. His voice was clipped. "So you're the man. Lady Olenna said you might appear. I never expected you to do half our work for us. You've saved us time and spared a lot of Tyrell blood." Jon inclined his head, ignoring the swirl of conflicting emotions. "We all have reason to see the Lannisters fall, but the city is on the brink, my lord. Cersei's within Maegor's Holdfast with King Tommen. She'll unleash every horror she has if cornered, maybe even wildfire." "Now," Tarley's mouth tightened. "I've heard the rumors. She stockpiles that cursed substance. Even if it means burning the city, she'd do it to keep power." Jon nodded grimly. That's why we can't simply lay siege. We must get to Tommen quickly, force him to order a surrender, or to remove his mother from power. If we dally, Cersei might torch us all. Tarly glanced at the men around him. A younger officer, possibly a son or close relative, stepped forward, looking anxious. We can break through, father. We've the advantage now that the main gate is ours. Menir. Tarly shook his head. Not so simple. Maegor's Holdfast is a fortress within a fortress. A direct assault will be costly. He looked back to Jon. Expression hard. But if what you say is true, time is against us. Jon set his jaw. Let me lead a small force. We'll go to the Holdfast gates. If Tommen is brought out, or if we can get inside, we'll try to take him alive. We don't want to kill the king. Without him, there's no legitimate claim for peace. The Lannister loyalists might fight to the last man. Now, Tarly's gaze shifted to the battered Northman behind Jon, then to Davos, who stood with quiet resolve. A small force might slip in, but you'll be fighting the Kingsguard. They won't surrender Tommen easily. I know, Jon said simply, but I have to try. If we can avoid turning King's Landing into a slaughter, we must. A faint trace of respect flickered in Tarly's eyes. Very well. I'll gather a wedge of men, my best, under your command. You'll push from the right flank. Meanwhile, we'll assault from the left, drawing the Lannisters' attention. If the Holdfast gates open for any reason, you get inside and seize the king. He turned to bark orders at his bannermen. We form 2 columns, one to press the keep yard, one to circle behind. Any man who yields, we'll take prisoner. We don't want needless bloodshed. Jon felt an unexpected wave of relief. Tarly was no soft-hearted ally, but at least he recognized the need for caution. Thank you, Jon said. When we move on the Holdfast, the Lannisters may bring Tommen out, or try to move him deeper inside. Either way, we'll be waiting. Tarly called for a horn blast, summoning fresh soldiers. A cluster of knights in Tyrell green approached, saluting with fists to their chests. Most bore the sigil of the Rose or the striding huntsman of House Tarly. They looked disciplined, if weary from the day's fighting. Jon saw grim determination etched on their faces. The yard crackled with tension as men formed ranks. Injured Tyrell soldiers limped away under the care of medics. Lannister prisoners were herded aside, stripped of weapons. Ghost prowled close to Jon, drawing uneasy stares from the Tyrell men. Tarly regarded the direwolf warily but did not comment. Instead, he addressed Jon once more. We'll strike soon. Have your men ready. Jon turned to Davos, Walder, Yessa, and Harold. You heard him. Stay together. Keep an eye out for traps. The Lannisters will be cornered, more dangerous than ever. Harold winced, leaning on his wounded leg, but nodded. Yessa gave a quick bow of her head. Walder still looked frightened, but held his sword with both hands, trying to steady them. Davos placed a reassuring hand on Jon's shoulder. We've come this far, lad. Let's see it through. Jon allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. He looked at the sky. The sun was dipping low, painting the haze with streaks of pink and orange. The city burned in patches. Tomorrow, the White Walkers would still march, and the realm's best hope was unity. But unity hinged on Tommen's throne, at least until Jon could claim his own rightful place. Or at least negotiate with the southern lords to bring them north. The thought weighed heavy, but there was no time for doubt now. Tarly's horn rang out again, signaling the advance. A surge of Tyrell troops moved past the broken archway, stepping over rubble and corpses. Jon felt the churn of adrenaline surge back, the pre-battle tension tightening his chest. He gripped Longclaw and fell into stride at the head of the wedge Tarly had assigned to him. Perhaps 30 men, including Davos and Walder, marched with him, with Ghost loping out front like a vengeful spirit. The rest of the Tyrell forces split off to the left, aiming to engage the main body of Lannister defenders between them and Maegor's Holdfast. A swirl of dust and ash rose under their boots. As they pushed deeper into the keep's inner courtyards, the crack of distant explosions made Jon's heart leap. Wildfire? He scanned the walls but saw no unnatural green flame. More likely, a catapult or a cask of burning oil. Still, It was a grim reminder of what Cersei could unleash if cornered. The corridor they entered branched, flanked by tall ramparts. Lannister archers fired from above, and the Tyrell men raised shields in unison, forging a temporary testudo. Arrows clattered off the raised shields with a sound like hail on a tin roof. Ghost ducked close to Jon's legs, snarling at the stinging rain of shafts. One of the Tyrell knights gritted his teeth, glancing at Jon. "We can't stay pinned down here." Jon nodded. He saw a smaller side gate leading into yet another courtyard, nearer the holdfast. "Through there?" he said, pointing with Longclaw. The knights hefted their shields and surged forward. A handful of Lannisters tried to block the gate, brandishing spears, but Tyrell's swords slashed them aside. Jon ducked a spear thrust and hammered the pommel of his sword against a man's skull. The soldier dropped, unconscious or worse. They rushed through the gate, then turned a corner, and found themselves face to face with a hastily assembled line of Lannister halberdiers. The lead halberdier lunged, hooking a Tyrell knight's shield and dragging him off balance. Another halberd came in from the side, biting into the knight's flank with a terrible crunch of metal. Jon grimaced, stepping forward to parry a blow aimed at his own chest. Sparks showered as metal met metal. Davos circled behind one halberdier, slashing at the back of his legs, sending him sprawling. The Tyrell knights pressed forward in a wedge, brute force against the less armored Lannisters. The clangor of fighting rolled across the courtyard, echoing off the high walls. In the confusion, Jon caught a glimpse of the Holdfast's towering gatehouse, rising just beyond an ornate set of pillars. The moat glistened, spiked, and the raised drawbridge formed a shadow across the yard. Arrows zipped overhead, some finding targets among the Tyrell ranks. A pair of Lannister crossbowmen stood on a walkway leading to the Holdfast gate, firing at will. Jon gritted his teeth. If they couldn't neutralize those archers, approaching the drawbridge was suicide. A Tyrell knight wearing a boar crest on his helmet barked command, and a handful of archers rushed forward, braving the halberds to set up near the courtyard's edge. They knelt and loosed arrows at the walkway. One crossbowman fell back with a cry, an arrow through his throat. The other ducked behind a merlin, momentarily pinned. That gave Jon and his wedge the opening they needed. They dispatched the last of the halberdiers in a flurry of steel, clearing the path. But the drawbridge was still raised. A portcullis barred the way. Jon saw a swirl of motion beyond it, more Lannister soldiers forming a desperate defense. And at the heart of it, a single white-cloaked figure, a Kingsguard. Possibly more than one, but the man Jon could see brandished a longsword in a practiced grip. Even from this distance, Jon sensed skill and cold resolve. This would not be easy. Davos drew up beside Jon, panting. "That gate's not opening unless they choose to lower it. Or unless we get inside the holdfast from another angle." Before Jon could reply, a volley of crossbow bolts rained down from higher windows. Tyrell soldiers cried out, some falling. The rest scrambled for cover behind pillars and the remains of old statues. Ghosts snarled, scurrying with Jon behind a toppled marble bust. The courtyard was quickly becoming a death trap. If they lingered, the Lannisters would pick them off or mount a counterattack from the holdfast. Jon's mind raced, searching for a solution. They needed to force the Lannisters to move Tommen, or else find some hidden entrance. But the holdfast had few vulnerabilities. Maegor's was infamous for its cunning design. Amid the chaos, a thunderous shout rang out from behind them. Randyll Tarley's main force had arrived, pressing in from the left side. Waves of Tyrell infantry, accompanied by cavalry where space allowed, poured into the courtyard. A renewed clash erupted, steel on steel. The Lannisters near the holdfast found themselves assaulted from two sides, though they still held the advantage of the fortress walls. In the swirl, Jon spotted Tarley himself astride a warhorse, bellowing orders to a cluster of knights. The clamor of horns and battle cries rose to a deafening pitch. Tarley's men advanced like a tide, forcing the Lannisters to retreat closer to the gatehouse. Jon seized the opportunity. He waved his companions forward, cutting through the lines to reach Tarley. Ghost stayed close, growling at any Lannister who tried to bar their way. They met Tarley near a half-toppled pillar. His horse snorted, eyes rolling at the scent of blood. Tarley's armor was streaked with gore, his sword bright with fresh kills. Yet he looked composed, a hawk among crows. "They're holed up behind the holdfast walls," Tarley barked. "We can't break in without heavy siege or cunning. If we stay out here, they'll shoot us to ribbons." Jon panted. "Is there any sign they plan to move Tommen? If we can draw them out?" Before Tarley could answer, a fresh uproar came from the direction of the holdfast gate. The King's Guard had stepped onto the battlements, brandishing a white banner. Silence rippled out as men paused, uncertain if this was a parley or a trick. Jon felt his heart leap with cautious hope. The white cloak flapped in the breeze, and the knight's voice carried across the yard, ringing with authority. "Cease! By command of King Tommen, we seek words with your commander." A hush fell, broken only by the ragged breath of wounded men. Tarley's eyes narrowed. Suspicious. "They want to talk? Now?" Jon exchanged a glance with Davos. "We should listen," Jon said, voice low. "If Tommen's behind this, perhaps he's convincing his mother to spare the city. This might be our chance." Tarley spat blood from his lip, contemplating. Then he nodded. "Fine. We'll parley, but I won't be swayed by illusions. If this is a trick, I'll see them all dead." The courtyard parted like a living sea, Tyrell men forming ranks. Jon, Tarley, and a few knights stepped forward, weapons lowered but at the ready. Jon's heart pounded. The Lannister defenders on the parapet shifted uncertainly. The white-cloaked King's Guard descended the walkway to a small wooden platform just behind the portcullis. In his hand, he held the banner of truce. Up close, Jon recognized him. Sir Meryn Trant, a name known for brutality. His weathered face was twisted in something akin to reluctance. Trant called out through the bars of the portcullis. "My king offers a temporary ceasefire, under the condition that your highest-ranking commander." Tarley barked, "I'm the commander." "State your king's demands." Trant hesitated. "King Tommen demands that you withdraw your forces from the Red Keep's inner wards. In return, he will meet with your lord or lords to discuss terms." Anger flared in Tarley's face. "Withdraw? We fought too hard to relinquish this ground. The city is ours, but for that holdfast. Nims shall." Trant's eyes flicked to Jon, then back to Tarley. "If you do not withdraw, the Queen Regent will. She will resort to measures that could destroy us all. The king wishes to avoid that. He is prepared to speak with your leader in person." Jon's pulse quickened. Perhaps Tommen was truly trying to rein in Cersei's madness. Or perhaps Cersei had authorized this parley as a ploy. Regardless, ignoring it could provoke her into unleashing wildfire. Jon glanced at Tarley. "Lord Tarley, let me go. I'll speak with Tommen as the king in the north. If they yield the throne, or at least a truce, we can end this." "Bannon." Tarley's jaw worked. He was reluctant, but the words from Trant implied a catastrophic threat. "I'll not risk my entire army on a whim," Tarley said. "But I can't stop you from going. Just know I won't stand idle if they stall. The second this looks like a trap, we'll storm the holdfast with everything we have." Jon nodded. "Understood." He turned to Davos. "Stay here, keep watch. If the gates open, be ready. This might be our only chance to end the bloodshed." "Nams." Davos looked stricken. "You'll go alone?" "Me and Ghost," Jon said. "We'll see how sincere Tommen is." Tarley stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Be wary of the Queen Regent's treachery. We won't let you vanish behind those walls without consequence." Jon swallowed. "I appreciate that, my lord." Then he looked to the holdfast gate, where Trant stood, white banner raised. "We accept the king's offer to parley," Jon called. "Open the drawbridge." Trant didn't move at first, as though he doubted their sincerity. At last he gestured to someone behind the gate. With a laborious clank of chains, the drawbridge began to lower. The portcullis groaned, sliding upward. Ghost gave a low rumble, uneasy. Jon's heart thundered in his chest, but he forced himself to step forward, crossing the courtyard. Tyrell soldiers parted, letting him pass. Silence hung so heavy that Jon could almost hear the rasp of his own breath. He approached the threshold. Beyond it lay the gloom of Maegor's Holdfast's interior yard. Dozens of Lannister guards lined the walls, spears raised. If this was a trap, Jon would have no escape. But if there was even the slightest chance to end the fighting and secure Tommen's acquiescence, he had to try. Davos watched him with barely concealed alarm. Tarly and his knights kept their distance, though they were ready to charge if needed. Jon paused at the foot of the lowered bridge, glancing over his shoulder at Ghost. The dire wolf stood faithfully at his side. Then Jon drew a steadying breath and stepped forward, crossing from the final patch of daylight into the lion's den. The drawbridge chains rattled overhead, and the portcullis lowered behind him, sealing him inside. The parted seas of war closed once more, leaving Jon alone among the Lannisters, facing the gates of fate.